Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this work session of the Washington County Board of Education. This afternoon, we have 3 topics that we will be discussing, but before we begin with our first, Dr. Sovine has asked for a few minutes, so Dr. Sovine, you have the floor.
Thank you, President Williams, members of the board. October is a busy month when it comes to recognitions, and I'd like to start our work session with some celebrations of our students and staff to keep us grounded in the work that we do each and every day. As you can see, I've invited some of our educational leaders forward to say a few things about each of these recognitions. Those leaders include Helen Huffer, who will reference the National Bullying Prevention Month, and then Dr. Melissa Brunson will make comment regarding Learning Disabilities Awareness Month, and then Dr. Jennifer Webster will make comment regarding National Principals Month, and then we'll conclude with Mr. Mike Embley making comments regarding the National School Lunch Week. At this time, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Huffer.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. October is National Bullying Prevention Month, and our counselors incorporate bullying prevention education in their lessons throughout the school year. But this month in particular, we make a coordinated effort to ensure students know what bullying is and how they can get help at school. Parents, school staff, and other caring adults can help prevent bullying in our schools, and that's what I'd like to share with you today. Encourage students to speak to a trusted adult in their school if they are bullied or see it happening in school. Our principals, counselors, and school staff are here to support students and make sure they feel safe and welcome at school. Talk to the children in your life, but more importantly, listen to them. Know their friends, ask about school, understand their concerns, and engage in conversation with them every day. Find activities that your children love, whether it's art, sports, reading, or any other activity. They can boost the students' confidence and tend to help them feel connected to others, which can support bullying prevention. Finally, demonstrate kindness and respect as a role model for children. Treat others the way you would like to be treated. Thank you for helping our schools and our students in preventing bullying.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Melissa Brunson. I'm the Director of Special Education, and I'd like to recognize Learning Disabilities Awareness Month. Learning Disabilities Awareness Month shines a light on the commitment of special education teachers, support staff, and service providers. These dedicated professionals work each and every day to provide personalized support and guidance to students with learning disabilities. Their caring approach and tailored strategies create a nurturing environment where every child can learn and grow at their own pace with their own unique abilities. The patience, understanding, and flexibility of special education staff truly make a difference in the lives of these students, helping them overcome challenges and barriers to learning so they may succeed in their educational journey. Thank you for taking time this month to honor and appreciate the impactful and caring work of these individuals in our schools in honor of Learning Disabilities Awareness Month. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Jennifer Webster, Associate Superintendent for Administration and Leadership. During School Principals Month, I invite our learning community to recognize the critical role that principals play in shaping our students, staff, and our schools. They are visionary leaders, dedicated educators, and compassionate mentors. This school year, we have challenged our principals to lead schools in extraordinary ways to build positive culture and climate. It is our highest responsibility to create a learning environment where everyone feels safe, welcomed, engaged, and valued. Our principals are guiding and inspiring their school teams to contribute to a positive school experience for every student. Principals demonstrate remarkable resilience and leadership, especially during challenging times. They navigate complex decisions, ensuring the safety, well-being, and academic success for every student. Their dedication to fostering a culture of learning, respect, and collaboration sets the tone for the entire school community. So please join me in extending our gratitude and appreciation to our principals for their tireless efforts and their profound impact on the lives of students. School Principals Month is a reminder to celebrate their unique contributions and the difference they make in shaping our future children and our community.
Good afternoon, Mike Embley, Director of Food and Nutrition, and I'm here to discuss the National School Lunch Week, which we are currently celebrating. President John F. Kennedy created National School Lunch Week in 1962 to highlight the program and to recognize the efforts of school nutrition professionals serving nearly 30 million children each day. The National School Lunch Program has been fueling students for success for over 77 years. School lunches have long been a lifeline for so many students across our country. For all families, including those that qualify for free and reduced price school lunches, parents have the peace of mind knowing there is a healthy, balanced meal available for their children. As we celebrate National School Lunch Week, I would like to recognize and thank our Food and Nutrition Services staff. Because of their hard work and dedication, our students can be at their best in school each day and have access to nutritious, appealing meals that meet specific dietary guidelines set forth by the USDA. And I thank the board for also recognizing their efforts. Thank you.
I just want to extend my appreciation for our educational leaders. As you can see, the month of October is very heavy with recognitions, and we'll be back this time next week with some more recognitions. So thank you, President Williams.
Thank you, Dr. Savine. Colleagues, I'd like to remind you that our work session is a time for us to receive information and to discuss, so there won't be any voting, no action items. So with that, we'll begin our first topic, and that is safety and security. We have with us Mr. Prue, our Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Ganley, our Supervisor of School Safety and Security, and Mr. Kelly, School Safety and Security Coordinator. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Yes, thank you, President Williams. As the board knows, safety and security is a top priority of Washington County Public Schools, and we've had ongoing points of emphasis and conversations. Many of our meetings, this work session, primary focus will be providing an update on our safety and security program, as well as opportunities to enhance a very strong program that exists, that's actually in place at this point. This time, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Prue, who will provide an overview, and we have a prepared presentation, but also with the work session segment and structure, we've made breaks in the presentation so that you can engage, and we want to provide board members with opportunities to ask questions and provide feedback as we strive to take a very strong safety and security plan and make it even better.
Thank you, Dr. Savine. Good afternoon, board members. And the safety team is thrilled to be here today to share on this topic. And when I say the team, as you know, for years we've been a team of one here at Washington County Public Schools overseeing safety and security. And with your investment in the last year, this team has grown to over 20 with our safety and security assistants out in the field, as well as the addition of Mr. Kelly here in our safety office. It's from centrally within Washington County Public Schools. So first and foremost, on behalf of the team, we thank you for the financial resources and support that the board has put behind enhancing our safety stature and protocol in Washington County. And so that's I think key number one for us here today. With that support, we've also received really some additional staff buy-in at all levels, and with support of senior leadership and Dr. Savine, with some of the trainings that we've done that oftentimes staff had options of attending or not attending. Really, a lot of those trainings really are now mandatory, and staff are gaining huge benefits at the school level with just that renewed focus that safety is a top priority for all. Planning and training is ongoing and consistent and continuing to move forward. One of Mr. Kelly's focuses this year really is getting out to schools and working with staff to make sure that the safety plans they're putting into place are actually coming alive and they're dynamic and they're not just sitting on the shelf, so that staff are receiving the tabletop training they need to exercise what's in those documents and plan for what may happen. You never can be fully prepared for and I think I can talk openly about two public events from last year, but a fire in a restroom on the third day of school, or a gas leak that causes an evacuation of a school on about the 5th or 6th day of school. You can't plan in advance for those, but if you continue to train over time, staff get used to, this is what I'm supposed to do, and this is what happens, and here's how I respond. And that's the key to the planning and training that has us more prepared. And the more our staff is prepared, the more they'll have our students prepared for that. I'd also like to make emphasis as well that our coordination communication with local law enforcement, I would say, is at an all-time high. The work we're doing with the Sheriff's Office, Maryland State Police, Hagerstown Police Department, and we'd be remiss if we didn't also talk about our local municipalities. The police departments in Boonesboro and Hancock and Smithsburg, regularly at the table, regularly involved in our communications and our activities. And anytime there's an issue, we can reach out to any of them. They reach out to us. There really is a renewed emphasis and communication between all of us, and that is really the key. And last, I think it's worth pointing out to you that WCPS is considered a recognized leader in Maryland in school safety and security, really on a lot of fronts. While the safety teams across the state work collaboratively all the time and contact each other and share best practices and ideas, I think it's safe to say we receive probably more calls than others. Not to say that we don't take from others as well, because that collaboration clearly happens. But I can also share that in facility planning meetings that I go to with our construction teams, when we visit schools, what I feel like I see across the state and other schools that I'm walking into, at least from an entry perspective, like our vestibules that we talk about, are much more secure than what I see, I think, in other schools, and I'm happy for that. And it feels good to me that I feel like we're at the cutting edge of some of that sort of entry-level security. We're going to talk about a number of things today, but there are clearly things we won't talk about. And there are places we will talk about and other places that we don't want to potentially share some things because it would either show a weakness in our system or a place that we're growing to, or show the bad actors someplace that maybe they could do harm in a Washington County school. So we'll nibble around the edges. Please, there may be questions that I've instructed the team to say, respectfully, board members, will get you that answer, but not today. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ganley. The presentation really is broken up into two parts. Sort of a school safety and security, where are we now, to talk about our current posture and stance towards safety and security. When Mr. Ganley is done, feel free, if you have questions that are burning on your mind at the moment, please interject. We want this conversation to be a conversation. But we'll definitely stop at sort of the midpoint when Mr. Ganley is finished to answer any questions you have before we get into part two, which is sort of the where are we going. And Mr. Kelly will be leading that piece. So I think with that, I'll turn it over.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. In the state of Maryland, every school is required to have a safety plan. We have a template in Washington County that we send out to the principals. They update the plan yearly, send it back to us, and we review that for any changes that are necessary. After our review, we send the plan to the Maryland Center for School Safety for their input and review. We've always received positive feedback. They're good with our plan. It's been something that we're pretty proud of. As you know, the school day doesn't stop at 4 o'clock. We have after-school activities and we have evening activities. And because of that, we ask the schools to have a safety plan. One example would be our athletic directors. They have a game plan that they put in place for, say, a Friday night football game in the stadium. The people that are working the game have an idea of what their expectations are because of the plan. They also know what the expectations are if there's an emergency and what's expected of them. So the safety plan doesn't just stop at 4 o'clock. It goes into the evening hours. The emergency plan's gotten rather large over the years because of all the mandates. So what we did, we pulled out an insert, what we call our green and red book. Inside the book, it has our emergency responses and protocols. So if a teacher isn't sure of what to do during evacuation, it's a quick brief that they can review. And as you can see, it's a green and red cover. The importance of the green and red cover is during evacuations. The teachers can grab this book quickly, evacuate with their classes, and if they take roll and they have everybody, they quickly hold up the green cover. If they look at their roll and someone's missing or someone wasn't in the class during the evacuation, they can hold up the red cover. This is a time saver because when the principal, who we'll refer to as the incident commander in an emergency, sees all green, they know they don't have to stop at all those classes. They can look at the red, send a runner, and just help the classes that need quick emergency response. Speaking of the incident command, we follow the FEMA incident command structure. It's a nationwide program that was put in place for emergency responders to be able to communicate with each other. So police, fire, and EMS respond to a scene, and their language is the same. We've incorporated that same structure. So if we have a first responder coming to our school in an emergency, and they say we need to set up a unified command, our principals, who are our incident commanders, know what they're talking about. So by using a system that's already in place and accepted by first responders, we are quickly part of that team. In June, we were fortunate to be able to have I Love You Guys Foundation come to Washington County. We had a 2-day event where they presented to over 120 of our staff, partners, and we even had a few visitors from our surrounding counties. So it was nice to cooperate with our other 3 Western Region counties, because now all 4 counties are using the same I Love You Guys. It may not be important as our individual events, but we can train together. If we train with, say, Allegheny County, we were all using the same language. When we had the training, I saw a lot of enthusiasm from the principals. It was one of those trainings where sometimes training, you see that everybody's not buying in. This was a great training. Everybody left with enthusiasm of the importance of safety, and they bought into the new I Love You Guys protocols. We kicked it off in Washington County with the superintendent sending a video message home to parents. What was important about that message, parents got to see what we're teaching to their children. And it also gave the parents an opportunity to discuss the protocols with the children. So if there was any questions in-house, they could handle that as a family.
I think questions on that as well. I mean, I think maybe some board members may have attended principal or superintendent's listening sessions. And as we were out, there were concerns in some communities about, I hear this term, I don't know what it means, and your communications don't tell me anything. So, and clearly in some incidents, the terminology and the language that we use is intentionally vague, because there clearly are things we can't tell the community about what's going on. But in scenarios now, families have now seen all of our protocols. So that when we say we're on hold, they have in their mind now, well, a hold is called for any number of these different scenarios. It could very well be that someone is passed out in a hallway and is having a medical emergency, and we need an ambulance crew to be able to get to them, and that's why they're on hold. Okay, no, I'm not concerned about that. So getting that out in the community, I think, is helpful on a lot of terms to ease anxiety amongst our community members.
On September 15th, we had our first system-wide safety day. It's nice doing it system-wide because they see the importance is coming from the top. We not only did all of our emergency drills on that day, we set aside time where the teachers could talk to the students. They got to explain what the expectations were, what the protocols are, what we're expecting when we go into one of these emergency responses. But another important aspect of that day was it gave the students an opportunity to have questions. If they didn't understand something, or if they were concerned about something, there was time set aside where they could talk to their teacher and get some of those loose ends filled and feel a little more comfortable with what we were doing. So it was a great day, and I think it was very successful. We have a great relationship with the Maryland Center for School Safety. Each summer they have a conference, a 2-day conference, where they go over a lot of safety topics. There's also guest speakers that they have during these conferences. And I think to show the importance that Washington County brings to the table, in the last 4 years, we've had a presenter at each of those conferences. Ryan Myers, an athletic director in our system, he spoke on the importance of after-school safety plans. Stacy Henson, principal in our system, talked about What If Wednesday. It's a program where she asks a question every Wednesday dealing with safety. So not only do we talk about safety in the beginning of the school year, all through the year, she expresses the importance of safety, and it keeps the staff involved. Tom Kelly, who at the time was an SRO, who is now our coordinator, he talked about the gang issues in the region. One of our student representatives on the board a few years ago, Kevin Boku, he was our student council rep for question and answer. So it was very impressive to see our county represented at all the conferences that we've had. There's a lot of training opportunities in Washington County and even in Western Maryland. We work closely with the FBI. They present a 90-minute program where they go over options during an emergency. And during that program, they also use what they call Hollywood blank rounds, where they fire the round in the school so staff has an opportunity to hear what a fired round would sound like. Sometimes a slammed locker was louder than the gunshot, so it puts things in perspective for them. We work with our local law enforcement. A lot of times it's our SROs. They go into our schools and work with our safety committees about tabletops and putting our emergency plan into a scenario, so it's not just reading it out of a book. On November 3rd, we will be the first region to do a safety summit for with the Maryland Center for School Safety. It's something that they're trying out so people don't have to drive to the center part of the state where we have little participation if it's a long travel time. By doing it in Western Maryland, Garrett County and other counties can come to Hagerstown as we host the first one and participate in some of these safety conferences. Just a real quick rundown of what the agenda will be like.
So good afternoon. The agenda on November 3rd will consist of opening remarks by our superintendent, Dr. Savine. We'll also include opening remarks from former Hagerstown Mayor and current Special Secretary to the Governor for Opioid Response, Emily Keller. Topics will consist of drug abuse in Western Maryland, which will be presented by the local DEA office and Washington County Narcotics Task Force. In addition, we'll discuss human trafficking, trauma-informed services for youth victims. That'll be presented by the U.S. Attorney's Office. And then the final topic will be an overview of incident command system and an actual case study of a school-based incident. That'll be presented by Frederick County Public Schools and also Frederick County Sheriff's Department.
Some of our other partners are the local EMS. We've had an opportunity to go down to the new training center on Route 65, and we got our security coordinators involved in the first respond and first aid trainings that they put on right there at their center. We have a lot of cameras in Washington County, and the quality of those cameras just keeps improving. It gives our administration and some of our staff an opportunity to see what's going on in the hallways as well as the perimeter of the school. So the advantage of having the ability to bring cameras up on the monitor if there's an emergency with their in-house command centers in the school has been a great asset. As you know, we've added a vestibule to all our schools. It's a great environment where parents and visitors can come into our school, have an inviting atmosphere, do business-like dealings with the staff at the window, but we no longer have to let people beyond the vestibule unless it's an invited meeting. So a lot of things happen in the vestibule. We keep the doors locked, and the day goes on in a smooth, safe environment. Here at the central office, we have a command center that uses a call center. One great advantage of that is if an incident happens at a school, the principal can call the command center using our specific numbers and tell us what the situation is. We can take that information and assist them with the other needs of the event. An example of that would be, say there's a power outage at a school. The principal can call us at the command center. We can get that information. They can go back to working with their staff and their students while we take care of the other calls that are necessary to handle that incident. Power outage, we would call maintenance. Do they have anyone en route? Do they know how long the power outage could last? Technology, we could call technology to bring the phone messages back to the school so parents are still in connection with the system. When the power goes out, the network goes down, but we're still answering the phone calls here at the central office. We would even call food services. If the power is out, the kitchen might not be operating. So how are we going to feed all the students that day? We have plans in place to get food to those schools and help them with feeding all the children. We also have a student management system through our Synergy software. It's nice because it's real time. If a student has a doctor's appointment and they come into the school at 10 o'clock, they can sign in with their student ID or their student log on, and immediately, real time, Synergy is putting them on the roster so we know that they're in the school that day. Same thing as if they leave early. So at 12 o'clock, we have several students leaving to go to HCC for college classes. As they check out, our Synergy is updating real time so we know they are no longer in the building. It's important if we have an emergency and say your principal or your incident commander is looking down and sees red, we can look in Synergy and see, well, that student's not supposed to be here, we're fine. They're at HCC at the time. Our SRO program is about 20 years old. We have 4 officers from Hagerstown Police Department and a supervisor, and we have 2 open positions at this time. The Sheriff's Office provides 4 deputies for the schools outside of Hagerstown City, and they also give us a supervisor. We're excited about the 19 new security positions that have been added. They work very closely with the SRO in providing safety and building rapport with the students. The difference between the SRO and the security is the SROs are not allowed to work with the administration on discipline issues, where our security personnel, our WCPS staff, and they can help us with the discipline. So if there's an incident in the hallway, or if there's a kid that's not breaking the law but isn't following the rules, the administration can rely on the security staff to assist them with those needs. They've received a lot of positive input, and we're hearing a lot of positive about their ability to assist with evening activities as well. One other person that we added to our staff is Tom Kelly. And what excites me about this new position is I think we do a great job meeting our mandates. We have a lot of things that are required by the state in place. But now we have a person that's going to go out to the school and make sure that those mandates are understood. Does the staff know what the safety plan's about? Do they know how to put things in place? Well, before we relied on the principals to do all that. Now we have someone that can assist the principals with working with the safety teams at each level or each school and helping them along to make sure that we're doing a good job at all schools. That would end the first part of our presentation. If you have any questions on where we are now. With that, I'm going to turn the, oh, sorry.
These rounds that are used in these drills, are they fired from revolvers, pistols, long guns?
Different types of weapons. There's probably about 6 weapons that they bring. The reason they call it a Hollywood round is it is very close to a real sound that a gunfire would make if it was fired through a regular handgun.
They also fire the rounds from various locations in the building. So let's say the presentation to staff is happening in the auditorium, they'll start further away and they'll work their way towards you so that you can get a sense. There are some rounds for where you are based on the distance that you may not hear, or you think it's a book falling on the floor or a locker slam. So it's really to help staff gauge that, perhaps gunfire in a building they may not recognize initially until the sound gets closer.
One thing that we've heard at some of these trainings is I'll lock my door when I hear the gunfire. And what they're finding out at these trainings, they don't always hear the gunfire. And when they know it's coming, they reacted more when the locker was slammed than they did when the actual gun was fired. So the shock of the locker slamming was louder than the actual gunfire. So it let people realize that, maybe I won't hear the shot. Maybe I should keep my door locked and closed during class time. So it's a great educational tool for people to relieve some of their assumptions.
So they're able to replicate an AR-15 and
Yes.
an AK-47 or whatever it would be.
They bring one of the long guns with them.
I know we have a sophisticated camera system, but do we have enough personnel to monitor them to be proactive?
Kim, I discussed with Jeff, and we can get back to you on that one. I'd rather talk about that one after thank you.
Well, thank you very much. As introduced, my name is Tom Kelly. I'll be going through the slides that will be addressing where are we going for Washington County Public Schools regarding safety and security. So as we address safety and security is a very fluid topic. And as it's based on the fluidity, we are constantly enhancing and advancing emergency preparedness. Be that in mind, one project that took the forefront this year was our emergency response protocols. Here are 5 of the emergency response protocols that we are rolling out. But not simply do we roll this out to our schools and our communities, but there's also a trickle-down effect. It also affects our emergency operation procedures per school, and each school has its own unique emergency operations plan. So we're encouraged to try to share that information and how that trickles down to the different plans within the schools. Another aspect of enhancing and advancing emergency preparedness are safety vests. This has been an aggressive approach that we've been rolling out to all of our schools. The primary reason is safety of our staff. As staff are participating on bus drop-offs or bus pickup areas, we want our staff to be seen so they don't get hit. But the other avenue is that it also creates an ambassadorship, creates a point of contact. Our schools are communities in and of themselves. This vest allows a parent, allows a community member to know who our staff are so they're not blending in. Once again, creating that ambassadorship within our schools and our communities. Promoting emergency response protocols. Emergency response and safety and security is a very tough topic to address. So we like to move forward in addressing this almost like a town hall approach by going out to schools, engaging with our staff, answering questions. But most importantly, as we look at these questions, we are listening. We cannot communicate and change the culture of our school district without listening and finding out what the needs are of our staff and being able to explain to them a little bit better on what direction we're taking when it comes to safety and security. We're also looking to a greater engagement with students and staff, train the plan. So by training the plan, we're taking these emergency operation response protocols and emergency operation plans. One example is tabletop exercise. Our goals are go into schools, engage with our staff, provide them training scenarios in which these are presented, and allow them to work through the scenarios. So if they are presented with an incident, it's an easy transition for them to work through, and it's a successful transition. The other aspect is, and the most key important aspect about safety and security in our schools, is the student base. You see before you a picture of McKay Dalby Elementary School. Dr. Henson, based on our changes in protocols, saw a need to go to her students. She created a safety team amongst her students. These students pictured before you is her team. They engage with her very actively about safety concerns, ask questions about where they're going in reference to our safety protocols, but they also participate in drills. But I think the most key important aspect is that message as senior individuals at the elementary school level, they're able to mentor and explain to younger kids what the direction is and be able to answer questions to the younger kids on safety protocols. So we're also addressing medical response training. We have Stop the Bleeding kits, and our goal is to force these out through training and kits to all of our schools. We're also looking at choke response kits for you today as well. Our goal is to place these in all cafeterias to assist in an incident where there could be a choking. Go kits. We currently have Go kits in some of our schools, in some of our classrooms. Right now, it is a principal-driven initiative. We're looking to put that district-wide to provide tools in our classrooms, Go kits in our classrooms, so in event of an emergency and teachers have to evacuate, that those tools are readily available for evacuation. Picture before you is Pleasant Valley Elementary School. School-specific emergency planning is very unique. Each school, although we create a standardized approach for a response, each school is unique based on where they're located. Pleasant Valley is one of those schools that is, we'll say, an outer school. They're on the outside of things. When they respond to an emergency and they have to evacuate, they may not have the tools or resources to relocate their students. In the event of an emergency, we're providing Mylar blankets or emergency blankets, like camping blankets. It's able to provide shelter for kids in the event of bad weather, rain, sleet, cold weather, whatever it may be. So once we're able to respond and provide resources, it gives us some time to get to the schools. Either provide transportation, shelter on a bus, provide transportation on alternative or an alternative location as well. We have numerous athletic events going on within our county, fall, winter, and spring. Enhancing communication awareness of what our plans are at these events when it comes to safety and security is very important. We've met with our athletic department, we've addressed this with them, And as part of that, they're rolling out a message at the beginning of every event, essentially reiterating what our emergency responses are, what are protocols in case there's an emergency at a game. We're also coupling that with reflective tape. Our goal is to put this reflective tape at exit points. So when instructions are given that find the reflective tape at the gate, that is your primary exit point in which to leave the stadium. We're designating at least 3 per stadium as locations as an exit point. You see before you a sheet with Clear Spring High School on it. This has been provided by Assistant Principal and Athletic Director Ben Copenhaver. As Mr. Ganley had indicated, is that our athletic departments submit a plan, an emergency plan on how to respond in the event of an emergency athletic event. That is disseminated throughout our partners that will be working the event, but it's also disseminated to the team that will be coming to our activity. In order to provide accessibility, easy accessibility, if you scan that code, say you forget it, you left your school in haste, you left it there, you forget it, or I'm working an overtime event as an officer, I just happen to forget it, I can scan that code and have that emergency operation plan for that day readily available to me on that phone.
And as of note, the QR code as shown on the screen is actually to the WCPS safety website.
Visitor and volunteer management systems. We are currently looking at a broad spectrum of platforms to address this and moving forward. As we address the visitor aspect of the component, it cross-references criminal backgrounds to get real-time response. It also cross-references the child sex offenders list as well. It can also cross-reference any type of domestic cases that may be on record within the courts. As we address the volunteer management, many of these platforms have components that can aid the human resources department of a school district to help them manage their volunteer pool. Door check monitoring systems. Before you is a picture of one of our safety and security assistants. The QR code shows a way to check that door and to log that door. One of our schools currently is using that with much success. So each door is identified in a spreadsheet or a survey. You scan that QR code. It gives the opportunity based on the individual that scans it to go through, check off the date and time in which they checked the door, and also make notes if there's any type of mechanical issues. Uniform signage. We want to provide a standardized approach to uniform signage on our campuses. Whether you're at Smithsburg, Clear Spring, Hancock, whatever the campuses may be, we want to address this in a uniform approach. We want to create an inviting environment to our students and our visitors, that if you're a visitor and you show up, whether it's to one of those campuses, you're going to see the same type of signage that directs you to go to a visitor parking lot, that directs you to go to the front entrance of a school. So before you see a picture, for those that may have knowledge of the public safety sector, this is what's called a Knox box. These boxes contain keys. The one on the left is a fire Knox box. Fire department has a master key to access that. It has keys in which they need. Based on our partnership with law enforcement in Washington County, the idea came about, we need accessibility too within our schools. Subsequently, we're rolling out, Springfield Middle School currently has it now. The photograph shows that, a master key in that. So in the event that there is a lockdown situation in our schools and police have to respond and evacuate the school, they now have accessibility to a master key to gain access to those doors. Upgrading locking systems. We're going to be rolling that out as it pertains to our classroom doors. I'll call it, for the lack of better words, a hotel lock. So from the outside, it's ADA compliant. You pull down on it. From the outside, you cannot gain entrance. It is constantly locked. When you're inside, the teacher or student cannot manipulate the locking mechanism. All they simply do is turn it, it automatically opens, unlocks, and they can exit the door. The only way to gain access is through a key to get in and out of that door. It prevents against many aspects of manipulating the lock, unlocking it, not knowing it's unlocked. It's one standard approach. Electronic hall passes. This is being used currently throughout some of our schools in a test aspect. It's a simple way for our administrators to keep track of those students that are in the hallway. It aids them in their day-to-day operation. But it aids us from a safety and security aspect that in the event that there's an evacuation and you're able to pull the electronic data up, you know who's been also displaced out of that room and who may have left. It creates that electronic footprint. We're also reviewing a lot of our schools pertaining to open layouts. A lot of our schools, or some of our schools do not have, our classrooms have walls or doors. We're currently in a review process of that as well. So crime prevention through environmental design is an assessment tool that we use in Washington County. It is standard throughout the country, if not the world. Before you is a video of South Hagerstown High School. Prior to the assessment tool, there was inadequate lighting on the campus. South Hagerstown High School had to supplement lighting utilizing portable lights or generator-driven lights to highlight those areas. Also, as a result of that assessment, what we did is that we got feedback from the staff and visitors. They felt very uneasy about the lighting. I don't know if some of you guys have been there. I'm sure that you have and have seen the lighting. This year, this was last weekend, the completion of the project. You can see the enhanced lighting around the perimeter of the stadium. The areas that we had difficulties with were behind the press box. And as you move out towards the gym parking lot, you see enhanced lighting there in the gym parking lot area. You also see enhanced lighting in the area of the walkway. As you progress, enhanced lighting to our driveway. You also see enhanced lighting to our main parking lot area. That came about as a working relationship both in the district and outside of the district to provide that. CPTED, the acronym for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, will be a mandate moving forward by the state of Maryland. We are ahead of the curve, and we will continue to assess our schools in that manner to address safety and security issues.
And I think to piggyback on this particular one, this is a project that was done jointly between general ed funding as well as school safety funding through the state of Maryland and the Center for School Safety. So really was a huge undertaking to get lighting where we need it, down lighting on the lighting standards at the stadium, so you're getting lighting outside the field surface, but also carrying that path, as Tom recognized, all the way out into the parking lots to provide a safer environment for attendees of the events. And I think the video is stunning, actually, to see that lighting.
I was very impressed with the video. That was the most exciting aspect of this presentation for me today, knowing what was before and what's after. Mr. Copenhaver, Joe Copenhaver did an awesome job of videotaping this. So I will turn the presentation.
I don't think we have the before. But for those that have been on the campus, whether it was for an evening sporting event or for showcase of bands or any of the others, I think you'd find marked difference being there. Probably lastly, as we think about where we are moving forward, we've talked about a number of things, but the team is always looking for opportunities to work to receive additional school resource officers in conjunction with HPD and with the county sheriff's office, understanding that they're struggling with their own staffing and their own manpower, but there truly is a desire amongst both agencies to see an increase in school resource officers when and if they've got the manpower available. They're more than willing to provide that to us. Although, as we've talked about as board with the board over the years, we do pay for the school resource officers. That is a financial resource we'll have to look to secure as well. Additionally, we've had a lot of success within the first year, and it's hard to believe we're not even to the first year mark yet of when we started hiring school safety and security assistants. But a huge difference in the schools that they're working in, I think, realized both by the staff and the students in those schools. We see a natural progression of adding our school security assistants at every middle and high school throughout the county, and that's something we're looking to do. With a couple of vacancies, we've actually taken some of the vacant FTEs and added some regional supervisors within what we have now. So we have 16 of our school safety and security assistants and 3 regional supervisors, one for the north end of Hagerstown, one for the south end of Hagerstown, and one in the Williamsport region where we have our security assistants, continuing to oversee daily, provide additional training resources, working with schools and school administration, scheduling and covering events in the evening, and they're doing a fantastic job. Lastly, we couldn't really talk about school safety without talking about the Maryland Tip Line. School safety begins with you, begins with everyone. We continue to encourage students, staff members, community members to report things either to local police, school administration, or through the Maryland tip line when they believe they've come across something that just doesn't feel right. If it makes you pause, it should be reported. And so we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the Maryland tip line. And so numerous staff members, if a tip goes to the Maryland tip line, numerous staff members receive that tip, as well as do the local law enforcement for the jurisdiction in which the school is in. So I think with that, we're closed, and we're happy to, I guess, Dr. Svine, if there's closing remarks or any questions from board members.
I just want to thank our team for that presentation. This is just a small snapshot. Certainly want to provide board members, most importantly, with opportunity to provide feedback or ask any questions.
I already know the answer to this, but this was a statement I saw online that maybe you guys could just talk about. Somebody said, can't Washington County find the funds to hire retired police officers and/or veterans to be in the schools while they're in session? I think that sort of goes to, they may not be aware of security assistants that we've hired, but I know that's an idea I frequently hear presented is, aren't there retired police officers who want to be SROs? Can you talk to that a bit?
We've discussed that with the sheriff's office, and that's something that they're looking into as far as trying to expand the SRO pool of candidates. They haven't been real successful in finding people that really wanted to take that on. With the school security assistant, it's not an SRO, but it's filled in some of the gaps as far as helping the administration deal with things where teachers are no longer needed in areas of, say, hall monitoring, where we can put a security person and they can prepare for the next class. So with that, we had a few law enforcement retired personnel apply for that. There's a lot. It just seems like the market right now is very open, and the competition is difficult. So we're competing against a lot of other places that are hiring people.
And I think I wouldn't want to put words in Sheriff Albert's mouth, but I think what I've heard from he and/or members of his team is that typically when an officer decides it's time to retire, they're ready to get out from under the badge. And so they're not ready to go back in and take on another policing role. So while it may seem that there's lots of individuals that are out there willing to do that work, I think they're finding perhaps that that's not the case.
Thank you.
Mrs. Williams. I just want to say thank you so much for this presentation. It gave me a lot of insight. And actually, I was at Springfield last night, and I wondered what this was. So now I know. But a lot of these other things are very interesting and nice to know about. Thank you.
It definitely is a partnership with all of our employees. It's not just our team that's coming up with these ideas. The choke kit, that was a member from Pangborn Elementary School that came to us with that. The Knox box, it was working with our locksmith on, we have to have a better way, and just working with law enforcement. These ideas we're not relying on two people to come with all the ideas. We have a great 3,000 team that's pushing the safety needs.
Colleagues, anyone else?
I know when I was AD at Williamsport, there was a plan for evacuation during the day and everything, but I do not recall ever seeing, if one existed, a plan for nighttime activities other than having law enforcement there, medical, an ambulance, especially for football games, perhaps soccer and so forth. That was pretty much it.
I think some of the push came with some of the FEMA online training, and some of our athletic directors have even gone to the after-school planning for stadium events. So they weren't required to go, so they took that on themselves to educate themselves with the needs. The Maryland Center for School Safety has pushed the after-school safety plan, and I think because of some of the training opportunities, we were really ready to roll into their expectations. And I think it's
I've been out for 11 years, so that makes a big difference.
Well, I don't think the requirement it's only been in like the last 2 years where they said we have to have it, and fortunately, we've been ahead of the game on that also because our athletic directors and working with Eric Michael and working with our regional Maryland Center for School Safety rep, we were able to put plans together. All of our schools, not only for sporting events, but we have our coordinator for music that works with band directors and work when we have say there's going to be a chorus presentation at a high school. They're putting together plans so we're prepared if there's an event at anything that happens in the evenings. We work with some of our contractors like the after-school daycare. What is your plan and who are you going to call if something would happen?
And I'm impressed with the lighting at South High. It only took 60 years to do that, but that's impressive.
You know, President Williams, if I may, I just want to take this opportunity to extend our appreciation to this board for making safety and security a priority. As you can see, very strong commitment. We have a very talented team. While we have a very strong safety and security plan, we're committed to continuing to enhance that. We do benefit from a very strong local partnership with law enforcement, but we also extend that with regional and state supports in this area to make sure that we remain on the cutting edge of providing safe, secure environments so that our students can learn at very high levels.
Thank you, Dr. Savine.
Will we have an opportunity to see the emergency card that you showed us?
The QR code?
You actually,
This one? Absolutely. We can
oh,
leave one in the
yeah, we
board
can leave one,
office.
Mr. Prue, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Ganley, thank you for all you have done and all you continue to do to keep Washington County Public Schools safe and secure and to keep our students and staff educated and informed. We
Thank you for
truly
your
appreciate
support.
it. Thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation.
thank you for your time.
Our next topic this afternoon is our audited financial statements and our auditor's report. We have with us Mr. David Brandenburg, our Executive Director of Finance, Mr. Michael Sampson of Zelenskovsky.
We just say ZA.
I just murdered that.
Make it easy on you.
Axelrod LLC, and Mr. Al Martin, our Audit Committee Chair. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, President Williams and board members, Dr. Sovine. You should have received, and looks like you did, the audited financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2023. Mr. Sampson of the audit firm Zelenskovsky Axelrod is here to talk about their reports and anything else he wants to add about the financial statements. Drafts of these statements were reviewed with the full audit committee on September 22nd, and Mr. Al Martin, chair of that committee, is here to share his perspective on the statements this year. The first section following the report is management's discussion and analysis, and that's something I write each year. That's beginning on page 4. That's for the purpose of introducing the basic financial statements, providing an analytical overview of their financial activities with some comparative data, both on a balance, a statement of position and a statement of activities basis. Page 5 of this MDA shows how the annual report is organized. What can be confusing about these statements is there are different kinds of financial statements that present different views, as explained on the pages 5 through 7 of that Management's Discussion and Analysis, or MD&A. The first two statements on pages 17 and 18 are government-wide, and they reflect the overall financial status of the board, considering both short-term and long-term information, such as capital assets and liabilities for pension and other post-employment benefits. The financial statements that follow those two are more detailed regarding individual funds, and they do not include the long-term assets and liabilities, but are otherwise prepared under generally accepted accounting principles. And pages 20 and 22 provide a good reconciliation between those two different types of statements. Then we have the budgetary basis schedule of revenues and expenditures under required supplementary information on page 71. And that's something that the board and school system management are most familiar and used to seeing and talking about in our budget discussions. One matter of significance that affected this year's statements is the treatment of subscription-based information technology arrangements, which are now recorded as capital assets and liabilities rather than simply expensed each year. Information on that can be found on pages 38 and 66 that are in the notes to the financial statements. Interestingly, this year, federal funding was down a little bit, 13.3% of total revenue, which is still nearly double the pre-COVID usual of 7%. Revenues on the COVID relief grants are recognized as expenditures are incurred, and this is the third fiscal year that those grants have benefited our operations. And we have one more year remaining on a few of those, and a couple months beyond that on two of them. Local revenue was 26% of total revenue, and by comparison, in 2003, local revenue was 44.4% of total revenue, so it's come down quite a bit. Our budgetary basis fund surplus is $4.6 million, which is 1.46% of our budget, and every category had a favorable budget variance this year. That's also on page 71. I'd like to thank my accountants for all their good work throughout the year and the substantial assistance given to the audit team. And I'd also like to recognize the conscientious work of the payroll and accounts payable staff who provide excellent service to this organization. And at this time, I'll ask Mr. Sampson to review his audit reports and any other highlights with you that he wants to draw attention to. And then Mr. Martin can add his comments, and I'll be available to take any questions at any time.
Thank you, David. So I do want to thank David and his staff this year for providing us the information and schedules we needed to complete the audit in a timely fashion. I did just want to make the board aware of that we'll be issuing, similar as in the last couple of years, a single audit report separately. And the single audit report is our compliance testing over the major programs for the year.
On federal funds.
On federal funds, correct. So just quickly, some required communications. They were actually in a separate letter to the board. Just to go through them quickly. There were no significant difficulties in performing the audit. We identified no significant unusual transactions. We had no disagreements with management over any accounting or auditing principles. To our knowledge, there was no consultation by the school system with other accountants. We obtained the required representations prior to issuing the report. There were no material journal entries that we found. We did identify a few significant risks, which we do with every audit. They were management override of controls, improper revenue recognition, and also the valuation of the pension and OPEB liabilities. We designed our procedures to mitigate the risk to an acceptable level.
And you didn't find any problems in those areas?
That is correct. We're just required to communicate now those risks to the board. And we did issue a yellow book opinion, which is we issued that we had no findings over internal control over compliance, and we found no material non-compliance to the financial statements. So I'm happy to report that. So now I guess we can dig into the actual financial statements. I'll go over the schedules and point out some significant items. If you have the report in front of you, page 17 is a statement of net position. And I guess before I get to that, I should also let you know, so we performed our audit in accordance with government auditing standards and generally accepted accounting principles. And we issued a clean opinion on the financial statements. That's the highest form of assurance that we can provide. So on page 17 on the statement of net position, this is on the full accrual. So this includes all assets and liabilities of the school system. If you go down to the bottom, if you take your assets, minus your liabilities and your deferred inflows and outflows, at the bottom of the page, you'll see your net position. The governmental activities, this comprises the general fund and the capital projects fund of the school system. You see you had 65 million or 64 million approximately. And for the business type activities, which is your food service fund, you had net position of 2.5 million. I did want to point out under the unrestricted net position, you'd have a negative 182 million net position. As I mentioned before, this is this is due to your OPEB liabilities and your pension liabilities. I do want to commend the board on contributing another $6 million to the OPEB trust this year. So as you continue to keep funding that program, your net OPEB liability will be decreasing. You see the net OPEB liability is $180 million as of June 30th, 2023, and your net pension liability is $20 million for the school system. As David mentioned, this year, the school system did have to adopt GASB 96, subscription-based information technology arrangements. You will also see a lease and subscription liability under the current liabilities and non-current liabilities. So the subscription liability was added this year. There was liabilities, some of them were for Tyler Tech and Dell, et cetera. They're listed back in the notes, as David previously mentioned. There's more detail. So if there's no questions on this page, I was going to go to page 18.
I might mention that the pension liability is the employees system for which we make 100% of the employer contribution. It does not include the teacher's pension system for which we fund normal cost only.
The teacher system is funded by the state of Maryland at this time.
We share the funding. But they recognize the liability on their financial statements.
Page 18. There's no further questions on that page or comments. So this is your statement of activities. So this really details the revenues and expenses, and it comes down to a net, what was your change for the year ended. If you go to the bottom of the page, we did restate the net position for the beginning of the year. It was only around $80,000 for the implementation of GASB 96. But you look for your governmental activities, you had an $8.9 million increase in that position. And that's due to a number of reasons. Primarily, in your general fund, you had a negative $5 million decrease in your net position. And you also had a negative approximately $4 million decrease, which was planned in your health insurance fund. And then you had about a $12 million decrease in your pension and OPEB expense. So there's different parts of those are recognized in your pension expense over time. And there was also your capital outlays exceeded your depreciation or your amortization expense by $4.4 million this year. So that all rolls into why your net position increased $8.9 million. You'll see your business type activities. You also had an increase in net position of $1.7 million. The bulk of that was actually primarily due to the pension and OPEB entries. I think without those, there was a $500,000 increase overall for the year ended June 30th, 2023. So any other comments or suggestions on that page?
My only question is, and I know we've talked about that insurance fund. We knew it was going to go down $4 million. I don't recall, did we discuss how far we're willing to let that go?
We did not discuss that at the audit committee, no.
I guess that's more budget discussion then?
Yes, I would say that'll influence our recommendation for a rate increase next year.
Okay.
Yeah, I think during the current year, you did not have a rate increase, but the additional contribution towards funding part of future claims and then current claims, was the reason for the deficit in the internal service fund for health insurance this year.
Yes, in 23, we didn't have a rate increase. In 24, we did increase rates about 3%, and that's still not expected to produce a surplus. We're still expecting a deficit in 24.
So that will bear some watching and planning in future budget years.
Sorry, go ahead.
Nope. Feel free to jump in and ask questions. Otherwise, I'll keep going. So the next page is page 19. So these are your fund level statements. So these don't include capital assets or long-term liabilities. You have your general fund and your capital projects fund. And you'll see your fund balance in the general fund at the end of the year is $29.8 million. And $15.9 million of that is unassigned and can be used to pay, any expenses of the school system. And the capital projects fund had a negative 500,000 of net position. That's usually due to retainage accruals that the county, or the school system has not billed yet. That's all I was going to point out on that page. I was going to skip to page 21. So this is your income statement for your governmental funds. And you'll see the general fund, as I previously mentioned, had a negative 4.8 million decrease in fund balance for the year. And then the capital projects fund had a negative $231,000 increase for the year. And I didn't have anything else to add on that schedule, unless you did, David or Al. I was going to next go to page 23. So these are the fund level statements. The food service fund, we've already briefly mentioned, but the self-insurance fund, which you kind of talked about, but I did want to point out, as of the end of the year, you had a $19.6 million net position in that fund, even with the drawdown.
And the good news there is you do have 23.2 million, close to, invested in helping to pay future claim liabilities. I believe that's with the state school board investment pool.
Well, that is with investments that we get through the bank that are government-backed securities, primarily U.S. Treasury bills and Treasury notes, occasionally some agency obligations like a Freddie Mac or something like that.
Yes, they are detailed in the notes, too. I think it's note 3 in the notes.
Right.
Of
And
those investments.
I'll just point out, while we're talking about the fund balance, our stop loss is at $500,000 on an individual claim, a specific stop loss claim. And it used to be that our goal for fund balance was 10 times that. So it would be $5 million. So we still are well above that goal. There's some discussion about whether that goal is appropriate since the fund has grown as much as it has, and since the claims can vary by as much as they do from week to week and from year to year. But we still have some runway to. We're going to try to smooth out the use of that and build, come back to a point where we're breaking even again.
And on page 24, that's really your income statement. And as we talked about with the self-insurance fund, that's where you will see the $3.9 million decrease in your net position. And you can see the charges collected and also the claims paid on that schedule.
And the food service fund here is full accrual with the effect of depreciation on the fixed assets and the change in the liabilities for compensated absences and the OPEB and everything. So that's why that's a different number than what we might talk about in the, and discussed in the management's discussion and analysis.
The next statement I'm going to discuss is on page 26. So these are your fiduciary funds. And if you look over the column on the right, this is really your investments in the MAPE Trust. Really,
Yeah, that's the MAPE Trust.
to pay future OPEB expenses. If you look down the bottom, you'll see you do have a $113 million in net position to pay future health insurance benefits.
So that's what we've contributed over the years since 2008 when the OPEB trust was formed and this requirement for accounting for the OPEB changed. That also includes market value gains since then. So it's not just money we put in, that's also what the market value that's appreciated and so there is subject to some fluctuation on that from year to year. But I think that shows a lot of progress.
And that is offsetting the present value of that future long-term liability for retiree health insurance over the retiree's estimated lives.
Then on the next page, you will see for the trust, they had a $15 million increase in that position, and that's due to the school system's contribution and also your investment income of $9 million for the year. So if you keep putting assets in there, I just want to check. I believe it is 40% funded right now, based on the actuary's calculation for the OPEB plan. In the notes, I'm not going to go through too many. I just want to point out on page 67, like David mentioned, that's really your leases and your subscription liability. That details those liabilities that you have going forward. So that was new. That was new this year. So you can read through them. It'll give you information on each one, the initial liability and the amortization, and also your principal and interest going forward on page 68.
And I believe when you implemented this during the current year, you went back and restated the beginning balances to reflect this as well. So if you
we did.
compare beginning balances on a prior year report, or ending balances on a prior year report with these beginning balances, they'll look different because of this restatement.
And actually, note 14 on page 66 details what comprises the restatement, the amounts that went into that. So you'll see your difference from the beginning in net position of last year to the beginning net position this year. And the last schedule I had would be in page 71. I think David really actually already went through the schedule pretty well, but that's really your budgetary basis. It's something I'm sure the board deals with all the time. And you'll see you had a excess of revenues over expenditure of $4.6 million on the budgetary basis. And as David said, all your expense line items came in, you had all positive variances there.
Revenue is one category combined. That's why there's one line there that's negative, but everything, as a total revenue, it's positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the one thing that as we were looking at the audit committee while we're on page 71, that I just wanted to point out is I remember years ago when my kids were in elementary school, I was on the board's budget advisory committee helping with the budget. This goes back to Wayne Gerson days, so it's quite a few years ago. But I remember the state funding and our local funding from the county commissioners at one time were roughly equal. I think it's very telling that right now the county funding is less than half the state funding. And I think that trend has been something that's been developing and continuing over some time. So as I'll mention some other comments in a moment, I think it's an area of concern that the local funding has not kept up with the state funding for supporting our education system. And I think that's something you certainly are aware of very keenly. But I think it shows here in the numbers, and this is a very telling example of just what that disparity is. And that and the graph and David's analysis under the management discussion, and it looks a little different in that graph because it includes all of the funds from all of the different entities and on a consolidated basis. This is just looking at the general fund back here on page 71. If you don't mind, I'd just like to make a couple comments. As was mentioned earlier, our audit committee, I'm very thankful to be joined by several other great volunteers on the board committee, including Ray Gray, who was past CFO and president of Meritus Medical System and then Trivergent with the hospital, now retired. Rachel Dorsey, Kathy Vaughn, who's practicing CPA, Adam Pelk, and Adam Weaver. And Our committee members were very diligent in spending time. We met in a pre-audit meeting in early May, as was mentioned, to help meet with David and his staff and others from the board, as well as the audit firm, to discuss issues prior to starting the audit and prior to year end. And then we met in late September to review the draft report and to help prepare any questions for the final audit and this evening's presentation. I just want to point out a couple things. To me, the audit or the model here of the statements is great, but I like looking at comparative numbers on a statement of financial position. For lay people, that's the balance sheet. And it's most meaningful when you look at where we are now at June 30th of 23 to where we were a year ago at June 30th of 22. So if I could direct your attention to page 9 of David's analysis, I think this is very telling for how you did. Is the system better off at June 30th of 23 than it was a year ago? And I think these numbers help give you a good idea of that. You know, if you look there at the governmental activities, the business activities in the total system, you can see your total assets at the end of 23 were $461.6 million versus $422.6 a year ago. And you look at the liabilities, you can see how while they've grown. The important thing is your overall net position improved to $66.7 million from $56.2 a year ago. So that's a positive indicator of the system's health improving, even when you count all these deferred liabilities and the capital assets and those sorts of things. So I think that's a very positive number. The one thing that's still, is an area, while you look at the general fund number of fund balance of about $29 million, that sounds like a lot of money, but your budget is $390 million. And when you divide that, I just was doing a little math while I was sitting here listening to the security discussion, that $390.4 million, if you divide that by 12, you are spending $32.5 million a month to support the system's operations and services for students for the school system. And if you look at that $29 million, that's really enough fund balance to cover, less than 1 month's operation. And when you look at your cash and investments that total probably about $60 million before you subtract off current liabilities, you really have a very lean fund balance of probably what would be, of less than really 1 month of operation. And we were talking in the audit committee meeting in September about your funding cycle. The county's still providing its money on a monthly basis, so the good news there is cash flow-wise, you're getting their share of the money every month. The state, though, apparently, David was sharing, only pays you every 2 months. So that means you've got to wait. You need more working capital to cover your bills while you're waiting for that money to come in, because they're not prepayments, I'm assuming. No. So again, I just a cautionary tale or warning is you've got to watch your fund balance level, or citizens or other elected officials say, why does the school board have all this money? You really don't have a whole lot of fund balance. You're operating very leanly. I'll just put it that way. So that's something to keep in mind. A very positive development I want to just congratulate you all on is finally, for so many years, we've seen the amount being spent on capital replacements, new facilities and maintenance of facilities and new construction hasn't kept up with depreciation. It was a positive sign this year to see finally that those capital expenditures exceeded depreciation for the first time that I can remember in quite a number of years. However, I think as your capital facilities people, I've heard reported, or at least seen reported in the paper, if you continue spending, I believe, at the current level, and I'll ask Jeff maybe to pipe in here, I think I saw something that it would take like 106 years at the current spending levels to replace your facilities. And as we all know, that's nuts. These buildings aren't going to last that long. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think we've thrown a lot of years around, and we've had a lot of discussion. rather than looking at it from a dollars perspective, because we always look at things in today's dollars as we shared with you when we presented the CIP, we often look at how many years have we gone between our next replacement school. And so, you know, Sharpsburg opened in the year 2000, and the next replacement school doesn't open until Downsville Pike Elementary in August 2027. Or excuse me, 2020 Sharpsburg opened, 2027 Downsville Pike will open, and we have 46 buildings. Now we'll consolidate and go down to 45 buildings in 2027, but that's typically the number we use, and is really in terms of replacement cycle from years between the next school opening. So that can ebb and flow, but we also, you know, at some point, the buildings don't last that long. You know, for 7 years between buildings with 45 buildings, we're pushing 300 years, and we all know that's not going to happen, that you at least need a major renovation during that time period. So I think we always tell you when we present the EFMP, the traditional period that's considered for buildings is full replacement or renovated modernization every 50 years, which means we need to be doing one building almost annually.
Thank you, Jeff. So I just wanted to highlight that area of concern. It was great to see progress made in the capital expenditures this year, but basically, as Jeff was alluding to there, we've got to keep that up and remind others of the need to keep that up in order to continue to maintain viable, up-to-date, modern facilities. The final thing I just want to mention, and I think we've covered a lot on the health insurance fund. I think it's great that you're making progress towards funding those future liabilities. Just keep an eye on medical costs, because if you dig, it's always great, and we used to do this with utility rates all the time when I was at the city as finance director. You put off rate increases too long, you dig yourself a hole that's much more difficult in the future to cover the expenses that are there. And so while no one likes to see rates go up, you self-insure for individual claims up to $500,000. So the money for that has to come from your current budget each year to pay for those expenses from either the employees or from the board itself. So it's just important to remember and do, I think, a solid analysis with your staff of what those healthcare costs are, and to work with the employees and retirees to help them understand the realities of dealing with increasing medical costs, and obviously encourage people to be as cost conscious as possible in their use of the medical benefits there. Because when you're self-insuring, there's no free lunch. Somebody's got to pay it. That's the bottom line there. And with that, I just think that, commend the staff for a great job continuing to manage the finances. There have been some challenges during the year. One of the things David shared with us is some of the expectations with the new blueprint from education, that the level of accounting detail that the school system is now expected to provide has dropped dramatically. And that may cause issues on, existing staff being able to continue to maintain the systems necessary to provide that information in a reliable way. Because now you're having to track expenditures not just by overall major functional category, but my understanding is now we're looking at school-based tracking, which is much more challenging. And I know you've experienced some challenges during the year with staff in setting up those accounting systems and making sure that information is, as readily available or easy to develop as possible. And basically what it means is you've got to set up a lot more accounts in your ledger to be tracking it at the individual school level rather than, system-wide. So that was a challenge, and I just want to commend David and his staff for dealing with that. It's not going to get easier as state funding levels and federal funding increase. It'll be a problem. The other thing is, as David alluded to in his comments, is the economic stimulus and COVID-19 pandemic relief funds are starting to diminish. And so you still have some coming in the current year, but that's not something you can rely on into the future. And so it's another fiscal challenge for the system to figure out how do you replace that. and looking at, future trends at both federal and state level, funding for the Blueprint for Education at the state level, the federal funding diminishing, and then hopefully, working with the county commissioners on continuing to, see, some proportionate increase in funding at the local level to continue to maintain, the excellence of the school system operation. And with that, just thank you. It's been a pleasure serving on the audit committee. I know my fellow committee members appreciate the opportunity to provide public service, and we thank you for your attention. Hopefully, we've been able today to try to make some very complex things. My goal is to try to put some of this stuff in easier to understand layperson's language. So I just encourage you to take a look at David's summary up front. Unfortunately, Mike, as the audit firm, he's got to audit the standard prescribed format. I will be honest with you, when you get multiple statements like this in a report that's 100 pages long, it can be somewhat challenging to figure out what's important in it. So again, thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions? I have just two. Mr. Sampson, I have in my notes that you said that our OPEB is 40% funded. Is that accurate?
I believe that's what I said, but I'll check here and really
I
quickly.
think 39%. There's a note.
39?
Close to
Close.
39.7, about 40.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And then, Mr. Martin, some of your comments kind of paved the way to this question. When you remark that we have a very lean fund balance, what we have there would maybe be less than 1 month of operations. And when we see $29,348,707, that's divided into two pots, correct, David? Assigned and unassigned?
Well, that's right. I mean, half of that, about half of that is unassigned, the 15.9 million. The rest of it has already been spoken for. It's either restricted externally, or we've already put it on encumbrances that'll be fulfilled within this fiscal year. So it's already been earmarked for something else, or the board has designated funds for a public-private partnership or something like that. So the 15.9 is really what we have to work with, and that's about 2 weeks' worth.
That's 2 weeks' worth?
Yes.
Okay.
So about half a month then.
Okay, so there is a percentage, I remember from my days on the accounting committee. Was there none of the?
I think it's like 2 months' worth.
Yeah,
two
normally,
months.
general government finance officers recommends typically something around 2 months or 15%. 2 months would be 16.67, but they generally recommend 15% as a minimum unrestricted fund balance.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen.
I have a couple questions as well. I'm looking at page, I think it was, 63. Can you explain what that discount rate is, please? And first of all, I should apologize. I do work in finance, but the finance that I work in is extremely different than this, so I appreciate the hard work you guys do. This is not at all something I'm familiar with, so if I do ask a dumb question, please feel free to call me an idiot because I don't know this. So.
It's not a dumb question at all, and really this has to do with looking at calculating what these liabilities would be, and a discount rate is really used in calculating present value of the liability.
So, the actuary is looking at your mix of your investments that you have, and going forward, they use that. Based on that, they come up with a blended rate of return. And since the plan isn't fully funded, there's a till you get it fully funded, they're not giving you 8% or 7%. They're saying based on the current funding being 40% funded, that they're coming up with a discount rate of 5.71, assuming you keep contributing $6 million a year to the MAPE Trust.
Right. If we were to decrease that funding level, they would give us a lower discount rate, which would make the liability much, much greater. You can see there that just a 1% decrease in the rate from 5.71 to 4.71 takes the liability up $46 million.
And that 1% decrease, 1% increase over what the discount rate that's currently being used is basically a bit of a sensitivity analysis that shows if it went up or down 1%, how that would impact that liability.
And thank you. And we said we contribute $6 million to that each year?
Yes.
And it's 40% funded, so
And currently, it's that your MABE trust has 113 million roughly in it.
That's right.
So I guess my question is, my biggest concern is the 40% funded, because we know that all across the country, I mean, geez, we saw what happened in Detroit, 15 years ago. What caused that rate to be so low? Is it something that so far back that we can't look at, or because what I'm worried about is repeating that mistake, and also what can we do to
I can
get
probably
as fully funded as
address
possible?
that a bit. The rules changed a little bit for governments like they did for the private sector. Private sector happened much sooner, but government probably, I guess, Mike, was it or David, in the early 90s, we had to start recording the future present value of these liabilities. Before that, you never saw something called a retiree health or OPEB, other post-employment benefit liability, on a government or a school board's books.
It was in the notes until 2008, and then it became on the face of the balance sheet.
Yes. And so that basically suddenly created an issue that before that, the whole governmental model was basically more like a checkbook. What did you have to currently, what were your current revenues or resources that you had available to you? And then what did you have to currently pay? And these future liabilities were something that you didn't have to consider. Pensions came first for government entities, and that happened probably around 1980 when I first got out of public accounting and went into local government. And that had a huge thing on the state suddenly having huge unfunded liabilities for its state retirement system. And I remember back then, there was a big outcry with, teachers and others about the impact of doing away with the old retirement system and having to create a new retirement system. I know some of the older persons of us might remember that. And I just remember that was what happened when that went into effect for pension liabilities back in the early 80s. And a similar thing happened for these, what they call other post-employment benefits, and it's primarily retiree health and dental insurance or whatever you might have that you offer your retirees that they might contribute towards, or the school system picks up the cost. And again, it was a way the private sector dealt with this back in the 60s and 70s. So unfortunately, a lot of defined benefit pensions and other things disappeared because they couldn't afford to show that on their balance sheets. And then local governments have been dealing with that later. So that's certainly a very good question, Darrell.
So we've come up from 0% to 39% in about 15 years. And originally the plan was to try to fund it over 30 years. I think it's going to take a little bit longer than that because with inflation and everything, that liability keeps growing, and as people live longer and so forth. But I think we've made a lot of progress.
Do we know what the averages are for funded OPEB liabilities?
It's all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah, it varies for governments. I mean, some governments don't put any funding away, and it's basically pay as you go. As they incur the expenses, they pay them. Yeah. So, at least you're commended. Across our client base, we don't have that many that have OPEB trusts set up, have put away assets specifically to pay their healthcare benefits.
So the accounting standard just required that you calculate it and put it on your financial statements. It did not require funding of it. However, it looks much better if it is funding and we're making progress towards it.
Yeah, and quite frankly, on your consolidated combined financials, that's why you show a negative on designated basically available fund balance. So because when you consolidate everything, you put your capital assets in there. Your fund balances are tied up in your plant, property, and equipment, your capital assets, and counting those future liabilities gives you those negative fund balances at that top consolidated level. Again, that's not necessarily what's required for current funding on a current fund. And that's why you want to watch, your current health insurance fund, your internal service fund there, to make sure that you're taking in enough resources from different places so that you're able to pay the bills and still not be, showing deficits there, that you're able to continue providing something towards those future benefit costs, as you have been.
And thank you for that. The last question I have, so on page 15, the factors bearing on the school system's future, is that part of what you wrote as well, David, or?
It is.
So I guess I do have a problem with the second part of that, the cost shifting and inflation. I know that we just recently made, inflation one of our biggest priorities in the budget. But we're sitting here, reaching out our hand begging for money from the county commissioners, and then with the other hand, we're bashing them upside the head. I understand that we certainly could use a lot of money, and we just talked about not even having 1 month spending in our fund balance. So, it's reasonable to be asking for more money. But, when we go and look at it, the amount of spending that we've had, and I went back and looked at our audit reports over the past 5 years from 2019 till this one, and the county taxpayer has given us over $500 million. I find it very difficult to say that they're not giving us enough money. While yes, we do need more money, I'm not disputing that. To go and just blanketly say that we just need more money, and essentially, what I hear, and I don't want to go and bash the county commissioners for that, because they have their own bills that they need to pay too. And we already get 40% of every tax dollar from them, almost. I would just like to be on the record as saying, for me, maybe I'm the only board member that has this opinion. For me, I'm personally thankful for the county taxpayer giving us over $500 million in the past 5 years, because when you go and look at our overall spending, and I actually wrote it down, our overall spending over those past 5 years has significantly outpaced inflation. So for us to go and say that we're not getting enough money, I don't think is reasonable to say without giving other explanations as well. Maybe we do need more money, but it's not fair to just go and say that we're not getting enough from the county taxpayer, because they give us a heck of a lot of money, and we should be a lot more thankful for that.
I think we've spent about $70 million in the last 3 years from the COVID relief grants. So that if you're just looking at a bottom line of spending, a lot of it can be attributable to that one-time money that's come in. We got $103 million in COVID relief grants, and we still have about $32 million to spend in this fiscal year through next September. So I'm not taking issue with anything else. I just wanted to let you know about that additional spending.
And that's not expected to be,
That
unless
won't-
there's some new
won't be
federal
ongoing,
program,
no.
it's not expected to continue next year.
That's right. Well, after this year that we're in. That's right.
Can I make a comment? I see what you're saying, Daryl. I understand what you're saying. But then you look at the replacement for our schools. We need money for that. When you look at our school system and all the things that we offer and all the things that we have to pay for, where do we get the money?
I'm not saying that we don't need more money. I thought I made that clear, and
Well, right,
I'm
but
gonna
where do we
restate
get
that.
it? That's what I want to know.
I'm
Where do we
just-
get it?
We have, like I said, we spent, we're going to spend this year $430 million this year. I would say that maybe we need to look at where our priorities are. That's a very deep conversation that is not on our schedule today.
Right.
And I don't want to have a debate over this. I just wanted to be on the record as saying that we're sitting here saying that we're fighting inflation when our pace of spending has significantly beat inflation. So that's all I wanted to say. I'm not going to say that we don't need more money. I'm just trying to say thank you to the county taxpayer for giving us over $500 million in the last 5 years. I don't think that should be an unpopular statement.
No, and quite frankly, in Maryland, the funding model is that the county taxpayer, through the county government, is the local funding support for school district funding. Unlike Pennsylvania, where the school districts are able to levy their own property taxes or revenue-raising sources that, the elected board of, school board members there is accountable to those taxpayers who elected them. In Maryland, it's the commissioners that provide the funding, and you're right, it needs to be a collaborative process. The problem you all will be facing, though, is as you meet your mandates for continuing to meet whatever the blueprint for education requires and some of these other requirements, I can tell you as the finance director for many, many years in public finance, there's no free lunch. Somebody's got to figure out who's going to pay it. It's got to be either the state, the feds, or the locals. And we all, through either our federal or state or local taxes, ultimately, it's the constituents that pay for these resources that support the system based on whatever everyone agrees the goals of the public education system are going to be. But you bring up very good points.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Sampson, I'm sorry. Mr. Sampson.
Yes.
Mr. Brandenburg, Mr. Martin, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. A pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Hopefully, we haven't bored you to death with numbers this evening.
Not at all, not at all. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, that brings us to our fourth topic for discussion this afternoon. And that would be the board's proposed 2024 legislative program. You should have materials in your packet for this.
I have a question. Who authored this?
Authored this?
Yes.
This was authored by the Legislative Response Team.
Correct.
And
Consists of,
the president, the vice president, Mr. Bickford, Mrs. Ram, Dr. Sovine, and Mr. Edwards.
Dr. Zetmeyer, it is based largely on last year's platform, so.
Okay,
Much of this has been the same for years,
so
since you've been on the board.
let's,
Yep, I can get started because they'll have an
ahead.
opportunity to go through all the different pieces and have discussion. This isn't final. Certainly, we're having discussion on it, so if changes need to be made, will be made before the next board meeting. As all of you are aware, this is what the work session we have annually to discuss what our legislative platform is. As an LRT, we look at what we've done in years prior. We move some priorities forward. We start to get inklings of what the legislature may propose based on a watch list. Sometimes we have to amend it depending on what's coming up. You'll also notice that I changed the presenters to LRT. Unlike in previous years, we've listed just specific individuals. This really has been a collaborative effort. As all of you will recall, last year, or the year before really, and Ms. Kate Ardith retired and we brought it all in-house. It really is too much work to do it solely in-house, and while we're not suggesting going outside, part of Mr. Edwards' role this year is to do some of the legislative advocacy work. It'll still rest with the LRT, and part of that is the legal department doing the bill tracking, monitoring, drafting any testimony and things like that. But the kind of boots on the ground in Annapolis work will largely not be my department. So during this presentation, we've inserted slides that kind of have a pause or discussion. We don't have to stick to that if a question comes up or we want to engage in some dialogue. We don't have to wait for that pause slide. But we will go over the core values, the legislative priorities, and the legislative watch list. And it will also include in your packet, you'll see that there's a draft bill contemplating for the delegation to sponsor. So with that, really the process. So I already spoke about how we brought it more in-house and we're not using an outside legislative advocate. The LRT really looked at that last year and the year before when Ardith gave us notice. And the cost of hiring someone outside. We were very fortunate to have Ardith, otherwise the cost is, it was hard to justify knowing we have those in-house that can really understand the work and know what we're doing and to be able to absorb it internally. And everything will pretty much flow the same way it was last year. I think the intent, though, is to have a more active LRT and to meet a little more regularly to make certain we're collaborating and getting feedback from the members of the board as well.
So a little bit of the path forward. Tonight, as we mentioned, is an opportunity for you to weigh in and get the legislative program into a form that you'll take action hopefully next Tuesday night during your board meeting to adopt a legislative program. After that, in November, we plan to attend a meeting with the Washington County delegation to share your program with them, to build relationships and so forth, which certainly are critical as you're working and lobbying and bringing forward the board's position on a variety of issues. Throughout the legislative session, as Mrs. Ram mentioned, we'll be monitoring the legislation, working collaboratively with a number of other organizations who advocate on behalf of public schools in Maryland, MABE, PZAM, et cetera, and certainly working with the legislative response team throughout the session as well to monitor the bills and work through that. And we'll mention closer to the end of the presentation when we will be reporting to you periodically during your board meetings to keep the board as a whole up to date, and certainly meeting regularly with the LRT throughout the process. So moving on to the core values, would note that all of these are unchanged from what the board had in place as part of their 2023 legislative program. Just quickly running through those briefly. I know you have the documents there with you. I'm not going to read it all to you, but certainly equity and funding. You just had the presentation with regard to your audit reports from the past year. Supporting equitable local and state funding formula that takes into account a variety of different factors, including the wealth of the local county, other things such as the percentage of students who are economically disadvantaged qualify for free and reduced meals, number of English language learners, the needs of your special education community, et cetera. Pre-kindergarten education, certainly important part of students doing well throughout their educational journey, supporting the equitable distribution of state funding at or above the required amount so that as many students as possible can participate in those pre-K programs.
And as Mr. Edwards referenced, most of the draft language there is similar, but under maintenance of effort, you see the language drafted, but without going into all the details, I just want to highlight a couple key items. Certainly, it supports growth in local funding in addition to what's required under the blueprint. It also opposes any effort to reduce the level of school funding. And then the last item that I really want to lift up and mention is opposes legislation providing additional school budget authority to local governments or weakens the local requirement to fully fund the requirements of the blueprint. It supports local funding growth commensurate with the growth of local wealth. So as the local wealth grows, the suggested support would be for more funding for our schools. In terms of adequate and equitable state funding to improve school building and to create capacity. You can see the language there supports increase in state funding for school construction facilities and just really calls for an equitable and fair funding formula for school construction.
And really the last two big topics, the first one really is local control. And as we've talked about for years, really the local entity is in the best position to be making the decisions that impact our students, families, and community. So we'd oppose any legislation or regulatory initiatives that would have the effect of reducing the local board governance, budgetary authority, or taking decision-making away. We would also, still in that local control theme, is local boards must retain the authority to grant charters and administer the funding. We really are in the best position. There are certain requirements under the law for approval of charter schools, and we really are in the best position to determine if it's appropriate for Washington County or not, and would oppose voucher programs or any expansion of. And the last big topic really is unfunded mandates, as we talk about, especially Blueprint. There's been a lot of requirements, and they say there's funding, but as we know, there's also a funding cliff coming up. And so as they keep increasing the requirements between Blueprint and Time Day Care Act and a lot of other initiatives, really our position is to stop unfunded mandates. If they're going to mandate something, the state should be funding it. So is there any questions, comments, concerns about what we've discussed so far?
Yeah, I do have a problem with the funding growth commensurate to the growth in local wealth. I don't think that's something our local community would appreciate. I feel like that almost kind of borderlines socialism, where you're kind of punishing the people who are successful in earning money. So I would be opposed to that. And you know, when you have, I think, maintenance of effort, I do struggle to agree with that. I think there should be a different way to account for local funding. I don't think it should just be a blanket, you have to give us this amount. I think there should be certain benchmarks that should be displayed by the local school system that would require the funding. So I don't think that should be particularly one of our core values there.
That has been a core value ever since I've been on this board, and probably before I came on this board. And with the disappearance of the escalator clause, you know, the county can flat fund this system. And at the same time, when the county flat funds, if we don't do something right, what do the local politicians or some of the local politicians do? They jump on us. They say, you're not taking care. You're not doing the proper things for our children. Hey, running a system costs money. Everything costs money. You want lower class size? That costs money. I could go on and on. But that has been part of the core values for years before I came on this board.
And I understand that. I just don't think it needs to remain on there.
Pardon me?
I said I understand that. I just don't think it needs to remain on there.
I think it does.
So one of the additional items that we did carry forward, and I want to have a little bit of discussion because you'll see this really in two places, the state funding of school security employees and school resource officers. And the Safe to Learn Act 2018 includes funding for a lot of security initiatives, but what it doesn't fund is the funding, sorry to say that twice, but the funding for SSAs and for SROs. It was a priority last year, and so there's just a discussion of should we keep it as a priority or should we move it to the watch list? Because the money is used to enhance safety. So, but it doesn't, again, it doesn't include provisions for funding of positions such as SSAs or SROs. So you'll see further on, we'll discuss also, I don't need an answer right now, because further on you'll see we talk about in a watch list about funding for positions, so. Dr. Savine? I can start by talking about, under the new priorities, they were moved from the watch list. Is the maintenance of effort escalator, as we previously had talked about a little bit, was abandoned by the Blueprint. They went away from that and changed the funding formula. And so local governments can choose to fund education at the same level per student per year until the value of the Blueprint formulas catch up to the maintenance of effort level. While this occurs, though, the cost increase far exceeds the actual revenues being brought in. So with all the Blueprint requirements and the fact that inflation is not, the formulas that Blueprint put in place were pre-COVID. And that was before the I want to say exponential, but the exponential inflation. So the formulas that are there are not keeping up with inflation. So the money they are providing will be a shortfall for us.
Yeah, that is, Mrs. Ram, a very solid point of emphasis. Recognizing that the blueprint is new and that it was put in place with dollars that were pre-COVID, and we know what has occurred over the last several years in terms of inflation. So those funds that are allocated do not come close to covering the true needs. I think the other thing is, as you review the per student allocations included in the blueprint, I think there's a need for that to be recalculated on an annual basis to determine the consumer price index metric. So that way it is a more accurate measurement of what the cost is, and to do that on an annual basis provides a structure, some guardrails, if you will, to make sure that the funding does address the full need based on the blueprint.
And that really does tie into our argument position about unfunded mandates, because the funding formulas they put in place, it essentially becomes an unfunded mandate.
And when you look at the impact of the blueprint, and I'll just go back to the inflation factor that we referenced, and this was pre-COVID, so those dollars are they're not even coming close to funding the staffing, the maintenance. We've heard earlier with the audit in terms of building repairs, and just the daily cost of doing business are pretty significant, and we simply do not have appropriate funds in the blueprint to address those items because of the restrictions that are currently in place.
Alyssa, can you explain D to me under the legislative watch list where it talks about the transfer of pension costs? That last little item, retirement burdens should be separate from the education budget. How can that be?
We'll get to that. We have a slide on that. You're ahead of the game.
Okay, unlike those two previous priorities that were moved from the watch list that were in place for 2023, this next priority is new for this year, and it came forward, members of the board that serve on the LRT. And it has to do with qualifications to serve on the Board of Education. A little bit of background information that you may or may not be aware of, but Washington County is the only locality in the state of Maryland that does not require members who serve on the Board of Education to reside in the locality in which they serve. In addition, a majority of locales across the state also require that members of their boards of education are registered voters. And so this priority has been put forward to address those two issues. And it would require candidates elected to this board to be a registered voter and also be a resident of Washington County for at least 1 year prior to their election to the board, and then during their term on the board, maintain their primary residency here in Washington County and maintain their status as a registered voter. Mrs. Ram referenced earlier, there is a document in your packet with what would be put forward if the board did adopt this as a priority to the delegation from Washington County for them to submit a bill in the General Assembly to address this and set forth the qualifications as we've outlined. So that's in there if you have any questions for her relative to that.
And just note, we're not raising this to bring to the board because it's a problem or concern. In doing some additional research, it was just discovered that we are out of alignment with other counties. And I mean, if you're talking about a board's making decisions about our local community, just there was a belief that they probably should be residents of the community. So that's why we're bringing this forward as hopefully as a member of the delegation will sponsor this bill as a legislative fix so that our criteria aligns.
Any questions or discussion relative to the priorities we've just reviewed?
Yeah, so I, quite frankly, I think for the priorities, the main one that I do like is the one that you just discussed. You should be a resident of where you're representing. The the voucher programs, I think we have an awful lot of parents with concerns that, quite frankly, we ignore frequently. And if they're not able to voice their opinion to us, I think that parents should be able to move their kids from one school to another and let their tax dollars follow it. Because, you know, if our values that we're teaching, which quite frankly mostly comes from the state requirements, if the values that are being taught to the kids are different than what the parents want, then I feel as though a parent should have the flexibility to let their tax dollars follow their kid. So that one I'm not on board with. The other one, yeah, that was it. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you.
Where are you finding the information about vouchers? We were looking at
Under,
legislative,
under B, local control.
so you're looking at core
Oh, I'm
values?
sorry, oh, that was a core I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got that mixed up, yeah.
So with regard to legislative priorities, you're fine with
I am
the
fine with
board
the,
qualifications? Are you
Yes.
fine with B, C, and D?
I am not fine with B. I don't want B. And my problem with C, thank you, C is the other one. My problem with C is we have bills that we need to pay, you know, whether we have 20,000 kids or 40,000 kids, we're still going to have to pay more for things like our internet and infrastructure, stuff like that. So our costs are going to increase no matter what. And I certainly understand the need for more money on a regular basis. My concern is that when the government is spending more money, the government creates more inflation. So I don't think that should necessarily be a core value, because my worry is that a bill that would have that factored in there would not be done appropriately and could in turn cause more harm than good.
Okay, it's not a core value, that's a legislative priority.
Oh.
So what that's saying is that as a
I thought you switched
board,
over
as
to-
a board, we would support any legislation, or we would want a member of the delegation to propose legislation that would address that inflation factor tied to the CPI.
Right. The way I see it written is that we would want inflation, or we would want higher spending, which again, I'm not opposed to. I worry about how that would look, and I don't know that we would want that to be a priority. I think it would be more something on the watch list.
So if the cost of running the system goes up, you would be in favor of limiting programs, even though they may be necessary? You know, a lot of things we do are mandated by law.
I think, and that's why I think a bigger priority than that should be pushing back on Blueprint. I think that's where we're mixing up our priorities. I understand that there's been a lot of pushback on Blueprint already, that from our local legislation that has been unsuccessful, but I don't think that's something we could give up on, because the mandates that are coming from the state aren't reasonable to expect for local funding. It's not reasonable to expect the local funding to be maintained on that. So I think a bigger priority we should have would be to push back on Blueprint rather than just give in and say, all right, well, we got to go and just have more spending. I think that's what the people in our community would want, and I think that's something we should prioritize.
There are sections of the blueprint that I don't think are going to go. I'm not too sure about the career ladder aspect, which is part of the blueprint, but I will tell you this. I don't think we have the time and the money to push back on something, on a battle that there's no way we're going to win, given the legislative makeup of the General Assembly here in Maryland. So we can waste a lot of time and effort, and possibly, this is my opinion, risk losing funds because the AIB, Accountability and Implementation Board, may say, well, you didn't meet this, you didn't meet that, so we're withholding 25% of state funds. It's just crazy.
I don't think I understand where you're coming from, but I think it sounds like a defeatist attitude, and I also don't think it sounds crazy to say that we should continue pushing back against something that is not going to be fully funded over a certain period of time. So I don't think that's crazy, and I think it's something that we should prioritize, and I don't think we should stop prioritizing it at any point in time as long as it's in place.
So what would be your answer if we lose AIB cuts our state
That's
funding?
not part of this discussion. I mean, we have to look at it. I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying that we need to prioritize certain things here. What I'm saying we should prioritize is pushing back on Blueprint because it's not reasonable to go and expect it to be able to be there in the long term. In the short term, it's going to be fine. But 5, 10, 15 years down the road, it's going to create a huge problem, not just for Washington County, but for every single school system. And I don't think we should stop pushing back on it for that reason. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to get into the nitty-gritty right now. That's not what the purpose of this discussion is. I was asked if I'm for it, and no, I'm not. I don't think that's unreasonable.
No comment.
If I may, I believe that this is an uphill battle to push against the state of Maryland, against the Maryland Blueprint, and I think that given that the rest of our priorities, a lot of them fall in line with receiving more state funding and promoting more funding for programs, I don't think it's unreasonable to follow through with that motion instead of pushing against the Blueprint. On another note, I would like to emphasize the state funding of school security employees and school resource officers because as a result of the ones that we already have in place, I've heard a lot of positive feedback from students, and I've heard a lot of feedback from students that resources lacking in their schools, that they don't feel safe in their schools still because they don't have school resource officers. We don't have school resource officers in every school, so I think that pushing for funding for officers in every school would be a benefit, and I wanted to emphasize and prioritize that.
Okay, moving on to the legislative watch list. The items on this slide are all carried over from your current legislative program. Certainly, a lot of discussion on the blueprint and the need to continue to monitor legislation with regard to that from a variety of different facets, funding, implementation dates, the career ladder, teacher shortage, et cetera. Also need to continue to monitor legislation regarding safety and security. You've heard a lot about that this evening. Just to make sure that there's adequate and equitable funding in order for school divisions to continue to get safer, as Mr. Snyder said, very important matter to all of us, particularly students in the schools. But also in addition to the things that you heard about this evening with the presentation earlier, but also funding to provide and help provide the mental and behavioral health services that are necessary and certainly critical to safety and security as well.
And the two topics, actually in reverse order, I'll talk about the pension costs. So with the mandate of an increase in minimum salary for teachers and the requirements of additional staffing for Blueprint, it increases our pension costs. And right now, the pension costs come from the education fund. And really the argument is to watch is if the state is requiring these mandates, the state should help defray the costs of the pension. They're mandating requiring additional staff. They're mandating requiring certain salary amounts. And there's pension that's tied to that. So the state should be contributing to those pension costs. That's really what that was saying in that paragraph. The other part I want to talk a little bit about, and I'm kind of impassioned about this is the burden shifting bill. It's been introduced every year. And what that is in special ed cases, due process complaints. A parent, guardian brings forward a due process complaint. They have the burden of proving their allegations. And maybe if they prevail, they're awarded some attorney's fees. But the bill, every year a bill is introduced to shift that burden, and last year to receive more traction. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And what that means is when the burden shifts, a parent can bring a complaint and we have to prove that we are doing what we're supposed to be doing. And then there's still attorney's fees issues, more expert witness fees, more staff time out of the classroom so that we can defend what we've been doing in IEPs and working with students. And along with that is an increase in staff time to prepare for that. There's also a fear there'll be less collaboration. Right now, a parent will file a due process claim. Our position has been, let's start mediation. Let's see what we can work out to resolve. But if a parent doesn't really have a cost associated with it, there's going to be, my opinion, is less likely that they'll want to collaborate. And really the goal should be for a school system if there's a concern, let's have a discussion, because it's in everyone's best interest to do what's in the best interest of the student. So we're really watching that, because we really think it's more a matter of when the bill will pass. And again, that's another burden and cost on the school system and more time for staff outside of classrooms.
So as Mr. Edwards said earlier, we will be having as an action item our legislative program on October 17th. So that will be an opportunity for us to continue discussion and debate. I've heard agreement and disagreement with regard to one or two core values, and at least one of the legislative priorities, maybe two. So if there is not a consensus to make changes and remove these, then we just take this as it is to our business meeting and discuss it and remove them at that time.
Correct. We'd be seeking consensus, and there's still a couple items left to discuss, but it'd be consensus to move forward as is, or there's consensus to remove items. So yes, you are correct.
Okay. So I would just like to speak to the legislative priorities, B, the return of the maintenance of effort escalator. I think this is important. I think it's important for Washington County Public Schools, and I think it's important not only for our system, but for systems that have similar demographics. If it hadn't been for that escalator, we would have really been hurting. We're talking $2 million, $2.5 million that we wouldn't have had. We were flat funded with the exception of the money that came from that escalator. Okay? So I feel very strongly about that. I just very strongly about that. I think it's a way for the state to hold local systems accountable, to make sure that they are appropriately funding. And they do it by, in the past, it's been done by comparing the local systems to a state average, and I can't think of a fairer way to do that. So that's one that I feel strongly that we should keep as a priority. I also feel strongly, as Darrell said, I don't think it's unreasonable to think that someone who's going to serve on the Washington County Board of Education be a resident and a voter, so I fully support that one. And then, you know, Grant, as he was very well spoken about the need for school resource officers, that's a big chunk of money in our budget, that if the state picked up the cost, that would free up a considerable amount of funds for us to use in other ways. So that's another one that I really feel we should be behind. So I'm not sure what I think about the inflation factor, Darrell, but I'm willing to listen to what you have to say, and to, you know, I respect, you know, where you're coming from as a financial advisor. And
like I said, my concern is that bill could be taken out of hand, and that's why I would not want that to be a priority. I think it should be more of a watch list. I'm not necessarily opposed to having more money come in as revenue, because again, we're always going to have to spend more money whether we like it or not.
Right.
Cost of internet isn't going to go down. Cost of construction, maintenance, it's not going to go down. We need to keep our schools. But again, to go and require more spending in a time of inflation increases inflation. And that's not I don't think that's a good policy to have. So that's a very fine line.
And certainly, we can think about the wording of how we have it phrased. I would suggest it's still a priority, even if it's just active attention to it. I've been hearing rumblings that there are other systems that are interested and but on both sides of the spectrum, right? So both sides of the argument. There's a lot of districts that are talking about working with their delegation to make certain that funding formulas are tied to this. And I am hearing that there's one, maybe two districts that have raised the opposite concern to your point, Mr. Evans. So it's kind of like you're watching your warning, right? And so I think this is definitely a priority to pay attention to, and we can certainly next meeting or even now have a discussion of what language we want to include in our platform. But certainly this is an area that we need to be on I don't want to say high alert, but paying active attention to, unlike we'll talk about Time to Care Act briefly, where we're watching it to see if there's any legislative fixes, especially now that some of the funding formulas have come out, but it's not as high on our radar. That ship has sort of sailed versus some of the other pieces of blueprint.
And I would concur with Mrs. Ram she gets insight from a legal perspective. I do the same thing with my colleagues in terms of the LEAs, superintendents, and hearing very similar things. I think from a legislative standpoint, recognizing that we've simply had one full year of implementation, and we're clearly building this ship as we travel down this road. This is a good opportunity to advocate for getting the funding model right. In particular, I go back to the point that we discussed in terms of when this funding was set, it was pre-COVID. And I believe we can all agree that inflation is much different in terms of when you look at the true cost to run, whether it's operations, whether it's staffing, everything has gone up. If nothing else, I think hopefully we can agree on the importance of us having a strong presence in making sure that we look at the funding model, the formula, if you will, and providing and requesting a little more flexibility, because we have some funds in the blueprint that have very strict guidance and monitoring in terms of where it should be. And there are some places where it's hard to spend that money. So if we were able to get more flexibility, that could ultimately help the local.
So maybe I need to understand this a little better. So our core values essentially drive what our legislative priorities are. And the watch list is stuff that would have a significant impact on the school system, but it's not something that we're necessarily going to drive the narrative on. Is that kind of?
Right. So you're right, core values is what drives everything. And these have been unchanged for years. And then you have your priorities and then your watch. Your watch, I'm sitting back kind of seeing what's going on, paying attention, provide testimony if necessary. But as you put, the priorities are like, these are hot button issues. If we have to divide our time, we're going to really push on the delegation. We're going to provide testimony. We're going down to Annapolis. They're really important. And not that the watch list isn't important. They're just, you have to prioritize. And we know, like I said here, Time to Care Act, or in a moment we'll talk about newspaper advertising requirements. The bill that's going to be introduced is great for us, so we're going to pay attention to it. But the impact on us isn't so grave that we need to make certain we're really on top of it as a team effort and as a board, and making certain our voice is being heard.
So, and the reason why I asked that question, like the inflation one, right? Is it too late then? And forgive me, because I've never been, I've been in Annapolis, but not for that. Is it too late to say, all right, they're introducing bills, we're going to shift this to a priority, and then we go and try to give our input? Is that?
No, even if we shift it to a different part within our platform, we're still going to take an active interest in it. It's just a matter of what's of higher priority versus not. Bills have not been introduced yet. We don't know what's being introduced. In our watch list, these are bills that either have already been introduced, have been passed, previous years, things we know that have come up versus topical ideas that we haven't seen a bill for yet. So like Time to Care Act, previously we had it as a priority because there wasn't a law in place already. And so there was kind of the perception that you have more opportunity to mold and shape what happens versus something that's already in place. Is that okay?
So it would be my hope that with what we have identified as the legislative priorities, that we would have a member of the delegation that would be willing to sponsor a priority. And if not, if let's say, for instance, another delegate from another delegation sponsors a bill that pretty much addresses our priority regarding school resource officers, then perhaps a member of our delegation would co-sponsor, or all members of our delegation would co-sponsor that, at least support it. So that's the way I view priorities, that we're looking for someone to put forth as the sponsor or to co-sponsor.
Correct, is pushing on the delegation as high phrase.
Right, and often we find that, it may be that one of the other counties will take the lead in doing this effort escalator.
President
And,
Williams.
we won't have to have a sponsor from our delegation.
President Williams, just listening to conversation and comments by board members and so forth, I'd like to invite Mr. Prue, our Chief Operating Officer, forward to provide some additional comments that may help better inform the board so that we're at a much better place before we conclude today's work session going into next week's business meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Svine, and board members. I think if I understand, and I worked with the response team a little bit in crafting this paragraph, so perhaps maybe I can frame it in a way that pulls things together and helps folks understand. So we think about the funding in the blueprint and the regulations of the blueprint. Those items that had a sticker price to them, the General Assembly, with the work of the Kerwin Commission and consultants and the Department of Legislative Services, put a price tag on each item. And it might have been large, but they broke it down to a kind of a cost per student for each of those items. So as we have started planning for the FY25 budget, I'll give you an example of an increase in technology spend to make sure that we're providing the technology that students need in the current learning environment, and that is allocated for FY25 at $63 a student. The point of this particular article is that $63 a student at the time they wrote the bill bought something more than $63 a student buys in 2025. And I think what I would say on this point is that I'm not they provided some inflationary factor. I believe the number I've heard bantered about is 1.5%, 2%. But as we know, over the last number of years, we've experienced inflation levels significantly higher than that. And so the point of this article is to make sure that whatever allocations the General Assembly put into the blueprint bill have the buying power that they expect them to have at the time that they're implemented. And so it may be written in this way, and maybe it could be refined. It's written to say, hey, we need to look at the inflationary factor. But this also is a bit of a look back as well, because what they're expecting us to do with the money they've allocated doesn't line up to where money is today. And I agree with you. Any part of inflationary factors, and you can look at a lot of things, inflationary factors, minimum wage laws, all of those things are a bit inflationary. If you try to, go somewhere to buy a service that was utilizing minimum wage employees 5 years ago, the cost of that service is naturally higher because they had to pay the wage earner a higher rate. I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. It just is what it is. So that's the perspective, perhaps, that this part of the response document is wrapped around, and I hope that's helpful for board members to to see what was intended there by the response team.
Yeah, it's not just I gotta be careful how I say this, right? It's not just an injection of money into the economy for the sake of it. It's really because, as Mr. Prue said, and thank you for coming up, I don't want to say arbitrary, but now it's almost arbitrary of the dollars and amounts that were picked.
So the argument is, to your point, is do you battle to have the requirements reduced or the funding increased? But you may not be able to do both, or the onus will become on the locals to foot that bill as opposed to the state.
Or the argument is, if the funding formulas don't change, no, I don't want to say it that way. I think really it ties into our core values. You can't continue to have unfunded mandates because you're requiring us. So you either need to change the requirements or pay for it. And that's really what we're getting at.
I'd be on board with that. I think that would be more appropriate to say that if they're going to require us to do something, they should be paying for it. And I know we've said that, and I think I would like to see that put in a bill, but I can't imagine the governor would sign that either.
But there's always the opportunity for testimony, depending on what is being offered. If a bill related to consumer price index is introduced, depending on what that language of that bill is and who supported it, certainly that's that argument of, well, either you reduce the requirements or, so you're still making those points.
Maybe the board could reach consensus on this item with an alternate language, something on the lines of asking the General Assembly to annually look at the requirements of the blueprint and ensure that the dollars allocated for the blueprint match the requirements.
I'm seeing some head nods. Would there be consensus to tweak the language a bit?
I think that's something they're planning on doing anyhow. Just from what I've heard of discussions about the blueprint through the years, that it's subject to change. No?
Well, there's nothing currently in the law that requires them to do that, though.
No, but I've heard that discussion in various places.
Mr. Stoffer, I agree. I've heard a lot of discussion in various places that doesn't get anywhere, so.
Understanding, I think, the current fiscal outlook of state government, specifically out towards fiscal years 27 and 28, I would think they'll be hard-pressed to provide more money to the blueprint.
And I believe this session provides perhaps the best opportunity to influence how funding is shaped in the future, in those out years.
I would agree.
I just wanted to clarify something. So what you're saying is to include in this a separate statement of, based on these, based on the newfound formulas and newfound information, the Maryland Blueprint should fund appropriate amount. What I believe is that this statement is more of a cognizance of the cost versus actual action or requirement of the blueprint. So I think that could be a separate statement entirely almost, because I think that at that point you're imposing one without the other.
There is language that talks about revising it annually.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to remember exactly what you said.
I think just for DLS really to look at, and the General Assembly to look at the values that were placed into the blueprint bill or into the funding model of the blueprint bill to ensure that they buy in that given year what the General Assembly expected when the bill was authored and passed. We can clean that up.
Yes, we will. We'll throw it on the screen.
Yep.
How is that sounding? To take a look at what they've crafted?
Yeah, I'd have to see it in writing.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll put that together. We'll put that together this week.
And maybe as members of our local delegation are going to have to do something that probably some of them don't like to do, and that's reach across the aisle in Annapolis and try to make constructive changes in the blueprint if there's dissatisfaction with it. I don't know if that's possible or not.
So have we addressed everything under legislative priorities with with taking care of C? Do we have consensus that we're okay to move forward with those legislative priorities? Yes?
I still struggle with a couple of those. The maintenance.
Priorities?
Yeah, the maintenance of effort escalator. I struggle with that one. I can't get on board with that one.
Linda? You're fine. April?
I'm okay
Yeah.
with it.
You're good?
I'm good.
Okay, so it seems to be that we have consensus for that. In terms of core values, where are we with those?
I'm good with them as written.
Anyone else?
The core values have been the same for years.
I would like to get rid of the maintenance of effort core value.
The whole thing, the whole core value?
Were you for the core values last year?
I said I was.
They're the same.
Right.
I just think in an area with such potential for growth as Hagerstown, especially in the blueprint, especially with such a growth in education, that a core value of maintenance of effort is almost necessary.
Is it the entire,
Like I said,
or is it that last paragraph that
the last
speaks about?
paragraph would definitely make me feel a lot more easy about it.
But so much of, Daryl, so much of our funding does depend on the wealth of our county. Am I right, Mr. Prue? That, money that we get for state comp ed, money that comes to us from the state is based on the wealth of our county. I just can't.
And I think that, again, to me, it makes me feel uneasy saying that because you're making more money, you have to give us more money. I don't think that is a core value that the people in our community would appreciate. So,
I don't think that's the reason. I think we asked for more money because every year that I've been on this board, we presented to the county commissioners a needs-based budget.
And-
So,
but again, so
and the needs
Can I-
keep increasing from all quarters.
Mrs. Murray?
When people from the county go to the county commissioners, they all ask for an increase for different reasons. That's what we do.
Right.
I mean, it's natural. And then the more money that comes in, the more factories that come in, the more all these warehouses that are bringing in all these jobs. I think we should benefit from some of that money.
So when we look at it, the cost per student, this is another thing that I was looking at for our audit that I didn't say, but the cost per student in 2019 was $14,888. The cost per student this year, based on projected enrollment, is going to be $18,851. We are spending more money. The cost per student, the amount of money that we're paying per kid has significantly increased. And, again, to go and say that, because you're making more money, you got to give more money. I don't know that that's fair to say to ask of the taxpayer. Again, when they've already given us, when you factor in this year from 2019 to this year, it's well over $600 million. That's a lot of money. To go and say that they're going to be required to give us more in a time of inflation, I just really struggle with. And I don't think that should be a value. I'm not saying it couldn't come back on or whatever. For me personally, it's just not something that I can go and say is a value. So,
But we're losing staff, teachers, Mr. Evans, you know this, to other counties because they can make more money. That's why the cost per student is going up. That's one reason, because costs are going up to run the system. So what would you cut to keep us on
again,
flat funding?
that's a budget conversation. We could go and look at that. I'm not trying to sit here and nitpick every single line item of the budget, but we can do that on Thursday in finance. But again, I'm just saying it's not a core value. So I appreciate you guys stating your point of view. I would appreciate not being attacked for having my point of view as well. So I was asked my opinion and I gave it. And I would hope that that can be appreciated.
My opinion is that as costs keep increasing because of increased mandates, we got to fund it somehow, some way.
With the removal of that last paragraph, would you be fine with it or no? And,
Yeah.
I mean, my thought is that paragraph is there because the escalator is gone.
It's clarified in the next line. If this is needed to following the elimination of the maintenance of effort escalator in fiscal year 2023. And if I may, after you finish your thought, continue.
I could be on board with it if we got rid of that last line.
The last,
The
just the
part-
last sentence?
The last, no, the
Or
last
the last
part.
paragraph?
Yeah, about the growing wealth.
Colleagues, what are your thoughts? As is with, what's the consensus?
I'd have to see it, right.
Okay, it's right here. It would just be removing this. It would be removing the paragraph that talks about,
I'm okay if you take it out.
So last paragraph under item A of the core values, I believe it's the third bullet.
okay, stands for keeping it. Linda's okay with taking it out. Peter, do you have a
Core
thought?
values. The front
Okay,
page.
which part of the core values?
We're looking at the third arrow under A, and it's the third paragraph under maintenance of effort.
Mrs. Williams, I changed my mind. I think it should stay.
You think it should stay?
Yes.
Here, we won't use arrows, we'll number it.
Mr. Evans, I don't mean to come at you, and I'm sorry if I appear that way.
I mean, when you call me out by name, you are, but go ahead.
I was clarifying my earlier statements. I just think that it would be, from my perspective, it's difficult to get behind eliminating this clause as well as not supporting the continuance or the reinstatement of the maintenance of effort escalator when this clause was created as a response.
So in my opinion, I state this because in my personal view, I think that the people of our county that put us here would not want that in there. And that's why I say that. I like to think that that is what the popular opinion would be of the majority of people in this county. And that's why I'm going to stick with that. If I'm the only one, there's a reason why there's elections and there's 7 of us. So if I'm the only one that's for getting it out and that's it and it has to move forward, then so be it. But I'm going to speak my opinion on it, and I don't think the people of the county would be for it.
I think you're wrong about that. In all the years that that's been in there, we've never had a complaint about that being in the core values. And I've been on this board from 2016, and I've never had anybody come up to me and say, oh, we've got to get that out, Stan, and so forth. That means if we take that out, we can't justify, in my mind, going to the county and asking for the proper amount of money to fund our needs-based budgets. We're going to have to keep our mouth shut then.
I'm not sure those two are linked.
Pardon me?
The elimination of that would not preclude us going to the county to ask for more money.
I think it would.
We can ask them for whatever we want.
That's my opinion.
That just
But
requires
this is
it.
That's
our
my opinion,
legislative
so.
program.
Correct. It's an interesting discussion to have, core values, what do you value, what do you hold dear? I know I have my thoughts about the amount of revenue or the amount of money that was left over that the commissioners had after not being able to fund our request, when they ended up with additional money at the end of the year, when some of that money, I think, could have come our way. It's hard to say that they couldn't be doing a little more when there are other counties around us who are, again, similar in wealth, similar in demographics, who support education at a greater level than our local Board of Commissioners do. I stand for the kids and their needs. So I'm for keeping that. That's just my position. So where are we?
I'll reiterate again, it needs to stay. It's been in there for years. I don't see no reason why we would delete something that's been there for years. And nobody's ever complained about it. I don't get it. I have some ideas,
Peter.
but I'll keep quiet about that.
I guess what I'm reacting to is I'm not wild about the way it's worded, because like Mr. Evans says, it sounds like we're saying if I make more money personally, I should owe more money, which, we can debate that. But I think that's what's sort of coming out of this, right? But overall, I agree. I think the escalator losing that was put a lot of pressure in a time when we have kids that have more needs. So that's why I'm not sitting here going, I have a firm feeling both ways. I think the language is confusing. I do think if the public looked at that, they would say, well, if I'm making more money, I should spend more money on the kids, which is a bigger picture argument rather than a personal argument.
Agreed.
That would only
I think
come from
I'd want
certain
that-
elements of the county.
I think the first two paragraphs still really capture what our intent has always been, and I haven't heard opposition about making certain the students have what they need. I don't think anyone spoke out against that. So if it's a concern with how it's worded, certainly we can take a look at that like we did the other section. But the first two paragraphs have gone unchanged for years, and in my interpretation of it, reading it, it's still that language in support of we need to be able to fund our programs to serve the students of our community and families. So, President Williams.
I'm just thinking, could you take a stab at the wording of that to see if it would be any more palatable to those that object to it?
I certainly can. I'm hearing, I think, what I'm hearing, the concern, and I'm saying, I'm not pointing, this is where it was raised, and it's a good point. The wording, we all know words matter. And the wording we chose, I can see where it causes a little bit of alarm. So certainly keeping like I said, I've heard around the table, we want to make certain that we're funding the supports for the students, and we're spending money on the students, and we're able to operate the system. But there's a concern about where some of that is coming from. So I can play with the wording a bit and pull away from the growth in local wealth. And I think that's where the cause for pause I'm hearing from three, definitely, and Linda was sort of a little bit in between. So yeah, I can certainly play with it.
It's the wording.
Yeah.
It's the wording. I can play with that. I certainly can. I think I will, to give you advance notice here, I will go away from the buzz phrase of funding growth, commensurate, it's the end of the day, but the whole growth in local wealth, that language that says, if you make more money, I take more from you. And I think that's not the intent. I think we think about also, I just read an article in the Herald Mail, Con Air is renting that warehouse across the street. And so there's some of that more than pulling from the local tax base.
Are we
Right.
more talking about increases in local revenues.
Right, yeah, right. So we'll play with that. I think that's, if I'm hearing it, that's more what we're looking for. It's not, to your point, Mr. Evans, it's not taking from the local individual that's earning that minimum wage, and minimum wage has gone up, or taking more out of their paycheck. But as more businesses come in and some of that local revenue, not local wealth.
Yeah, exactly, local revenue.
How do you feel about that, Mr. Evans?
I feel better about it. I would want to see the verbiage on it.
Oh, yeah.
I do worry about tax breaks being given to these corporations who come in and then they leave in 10 years and never give us anything except for an empty warehouse. But I would want to see, the verbiage of that before I'd say yes.
And looking at our key dates, so we meet with the delegation on the 6th, so we really do need to have a program before then to take to the delegation. And I don't have a calendar in front of me. Do we have what's our board meeting in November? Anybody?
7th.
The 7th?
Tuesday, yeah.
Okay.
That's the work session, right?
That's a work session, yeah. So
Tuesday would be the last opportunity prior to that meeting for the board to act on its legislative program.
and in complying with open meetings and public information, what we can do is I can, if for some reason I get this out before when board packet goes live, we'll make certain it's posted online so the members of the board can see it, as well as we're not violating any Open Meetings Act violations by sharing something that should be part of discussion. We can talk about how to put this in the next board meeting so we have an opportunity for more discussion and make edits without doing a lot of motions to amend what's already in the board packet. So we'll talk through that.
Okay, so with the rewording of what is there for maintenance of effort and the rewording of what is listed under legislative priority C, okay? We'll have that to discuss. Are we okay with the watch list as it is? Do we have consensus that the watch list is fine? So there's work to be done yet on core values, and the watch list. Okay.
No, the
watch
legislative.
list.
I'm sorry, not
Legislative
the watch
priorities.
list, legislative priorities.
Value.
Thank you, I misspoke. So before we go, I want to address something that I heard Mr. Evans say, because I want to make sure that we've covered core values. You made a comment about not being comfortable with what's there for voucher programs. Did you not?
I did.
You don't want that included?
I don't want that in there at all.
Okay, so what that says is that any expansion of what is there currently,
Right.
okay?
So there is still it wouldn't be, there is already some provisions in place. We just don't want to expand it beyond what's currently there.
Right. Yeah, I don't want that. I don't want that in there.
So how does the rest?
I am opposed to school vouchers, and I'll tell you why. Private schools don't have to operate by the same rules and regulations that public schools do. And I had a student once leave Heritage Academy, came back to me, my classroom at Williamsport. I always try to get to know the new students. I said, "Why did you leave Heritage Academy?" The young lady, and I won't disclose her name, she still lives in the county, she says, "I got thrown out." I said, "May I ask why you got thrown out of Heritage Academy?" She said, "For smoking and profanity." If we got rid of every kid who ever committed those two things in the public school system, which we can't do, I mean, it's ridiculous. They don't.
So you're saying that private schools hold kids to a higher standard than we do?
No, we can't put them out. When the private schools don't want them, where do they show up? And we have to take them, right? Right?
That is absolutely true.
That's right. We got to take them.
and their money comes to us.
Regardless.
Okay, so as I read this, what this is saying is that we are not interested in expanding anything beyond what is currently in the legislature regarding vouchers.
Right, that's what's written there, correct?
Right.
Correct. I don't
And
want
you're not
that-
good, you're not good with that,
That,
that
I don't even think.
you
that
would
should be
like to
mentioned.
see voucher programs expanded.
I didn't say that, I just said that I
Well, but
just don't
that's-
want that in there as a value.
So you don't want it addressed at all?
Correct.
Voucher programs at all?
Right.
And the reasoning being,
I agree
Because-
wholeheartedly. We should not be addressing that. That's not a priority for us. We have too many irons in the fire to worry about that.
Would there be any concern about moving it to I'm not aware of any bills being introduced, but maybe moving it to a watch list so that we're just watching for it?
I'd be happy on a watch list.
I think it's a public school system. We ought to keep it in. We're a public school system. We need to keep it in. We need to support our public schools.
I don't understand the reasoning for wanting to take it out, and so I'm for keeping it in. You know,
My personal problem with it is that it's the people's tax dollars, and we're telling them how they have to, where it has to go, and how their school system has to be ran. And there are certain people who don't necessarily have the funds to pay for those taxes, plus go to a school that more closely aligns to their values. I'm not saying that, and I don't think it's reasonable to go and say that because I am neither for nor against expanding that school voucher program, but I don't think that it's reasonable for me to say that I don't support public education as a result of that. I think that when we go and say that, you know, you have to learn the way that the state says that we have to learn, I think that that's unreasonable, and I think that we should give parents more autonomy over where their kids are able to go to school and where they're able to learn.
Good point.
Homeschooling,
Parents could do that,
yeah.
but they still have to pay the tax dollars, and they still
But-
have to go and pay for all those resources and
So
everything
do
like that.
older people, people that don't have any children, they have to pay the same thing.
Right.
A lot of citizens have to pay. I mean, we all have to pay, whether we have children in school or not.
Right.
That's the way of the system.
Right.
So you're in favor of keeping
Yes,
this?
please.
Peter? I know how Stan feels.
I'd really like to go to their our legislators with, you know, even with small objections, but overall with a unified voice. So with that in mind, I'm fine moving it to the watch list.
So we're not keeping it as our values?
And not keeping it as a core value.
That is a core.
It's a core
so you don't want it
value.
as a core value. Apologize.
What did you float, Elisa?
I floated that if we don't keep it as a core value, we move the concept to the watch list. I'm not aware of any legislative action that may be taken this session, but that we are keenly aware it's a possibility as a public school system and we will be watching for it. I just floated as that because we have differing opinions on the topic, but still a consensus that no matter where you are on the issue, it's a concern for everyone around the table, but not the same for the same reason.
Right.
And depending on, if we put it on the watch list and something's introduced, it might be something that there's consensus on, but given how the bill is introduced. We certainly could put voucher programs on a core value without any explanation because it is a concern for everybody. But really, I think it's just more of the depends what happens in the legislature concern. I'm running out of words at the end of the day here, but I think you know where I'm going.
That makes perfect sense to me. I'd be 100% on board with that.
I'm just, look, spirit of compromise, I think that's fine, but.
Again, I reiterate, I don't know why suddenly these things are objectionable when they've been there ever since many of us have been on this board for 4 or more years. I just don't get it. And if somebody would like to enlighten me about that, I'm willing to listen, but so far I haven't heard any argument that justifies changing what has been core values for probably decades. If we're going to be public school board members, we need to oppose things that may cause disruption and problems in the public school system. We have to be firm advocates for the public school system, which educates most of the children in this country and certainly in this county.
And Ms. Murray, to answer your question you started to pose there, the idea that I floated was to, while it's moving away from core value, it'd be to the watch list, and it's still something we're paying attention to and actively watching. We're just not delineating specifically what side of the argument, just to see if there's any changes we're watching, to see what happens, and then at that time, make a decision on what the board would like to do in terms of speaking for or against and pushing on the delegation, but it's an item we'd be watching. Like Time to Care Act has never been a specific prior or core value, but.
So we don't have a majority of the board that feels that it should remain as a core value, and we don't have a majority of the board that feels that it should be removed as a core value. So
President Williams, I want to thank Mrs. Ram for listening intently to the discussion and the debate. What I've heard and being here for a little over a year now, this was not an item that I'm aware of that was, we had any legislation last year that rose to any level. And I'm looking to the back there for support, because I do want to make
Correct,
sure.
there was not.
Okay.
And
So what I'm hearing is this will remain on the document. It will just simply be shifted to the watch list. And should there be legislation that's introduced, then we can bring that back to the board at that time with a specific language and the with the introduced bill, and then the board can weigh in specifically on that language, whether there's support or not.
And truthfully, and I might be wrong, stranger things have happened in the legislature, but of all the buzz going around, this has not been a hot button topic. Everyone's top of mind has really been all things related blueprint and special ed. So, and it's not to say if we make a change now, it couldn't change in the future, because really this document is the views of the makeup of the board at the time it's written.
Okay, so.
And I'll just, if I may, President Williams, I do think, this discussion, debate, sometimes as painful as it may be, is very healthy, because ultimately, when you look at, and I'll go back to what I'd referenced earlier, this is a very important year from a legislative standpoint and a blueprint. And if we had an item that had been lifted up as a significant issue that perhaps the board needed to reach consensus on, I believe we needed to make that decision now. But this is an item that it's not the case. What I've heard is there's recognition with the full board that's here, that's present right now, that the funding mechanism, the formula for the blueprint, there's a need for that to be adjusted so that funds are appropriately addressing the intent and the needs, and the funding levels are at least reevaluated and recalculated to make sure it's accurate in terms of appropriately funding based on what the cost is at this time post-COVID. To me, that's the most important thing, and for our board to be united on that from a legislative standpoint is very important. And we know as we go to Annapolis, being united on that piece, I am an optimist, and I believe there's an opportunity for us to perhaps get this right, or for there to be some adjustments that help us from a state standpoint, and ultimately may provide some additional support from a local. Now, when you look at our history, recognize that the local funding piece has been a challenge in comparison to other districts. But I do believe to be united in a year that making adjustments to the blueprint and having a voice in Annapolis, I can't think of a time where it's not more important to be at least united on those items that we anticipate will be lifted up in this legislative process. And I believe the discussion I've heard is the blueprint funding formula is, there's still an opportunity to make adjustments so that we better get it, or we're better at hitting the mark in terms of the true funding.
Thank you, Dr. Savine. So what's the will of the board then?
As far as what?
Leave it in, move it to the watch list.
I'm for moving it to the watch list.
Me too.
Me too.
Move to the watch list.
Okay, we'll move it to the watch list.
I will make that happen. I did, so then do we have consensus then on the watch list for Blueprint for Maryland Future, Time to Care Act, burden shifting, pension costs, safe and secure learning environment, newspaper advertising, and vouchers?
Yes.
That was my understanding.
Okay, just wanted to confirm. I did skip over the last two slides, just key dates. They're in your packet of what's going on in the legislature, and the reports to the board will be the same they've always been, the second board meeting of the month. And my goal would be to have everything out to the board by Friday with the changed language with your board packet.
Thank you, thank you. Colleagues, is there anything else? Any further discussion, questions?
I appreciated the discussion.
I do too, I do too. I do too.
I do really like this format of having work sessions and we talk through stuff, and that's great. And we can continue to talk next week. Just, I think it's not necessarily, we'd like to come forward with a cohesive plan, so.
Mr. Evans, it troubles me that you think that there was an attack, because that's the last thing on my mind when we have these kinds of discussions. Sometimes I feel very passionately about something, so I don't want you ever to feel that I'm coming at you in attack mode.
I don't think you have.
Okay, okay.
Usually, you're right. It is good
I just,
dialogue.
yeah, I just appreciate the rigorous discussion, passionate discussion. Okay. Okay. Anything else? Dr. Svine, anything else?
I'll just comment that there's a reason why we come together in a work session, and that is to engage in respectful, healthy discussion and debate. And through that, and if you look at our legislative process, things are adjusted and tweaked to hopefully bring about improvement. So, understanding that it's quite common to have different viewpoints. Being able to civilly discuss and debate is very healthy and reach consensus so that ultimately we can position ourselves to move forward to advocate for our students and our local school system and hopefully strengthen the overall funding mechanisms that are needed to address the pretty significant needs in our school district.
Thank you, Dr. Spine. You said that so very well. Thank you. Colleagues, thank you for an afternoon of good meetings. Appreciate it. Staff, thank you all. Have a good evening.